Deep in the data streams of the James Webb Space Telescope, something impossible appears. A signal, faint but repeating, coming from beyond the edge of everything we know. The scientists at NASA run the numbers again and again, but the answer doesn't change. This transmission is older than the Big Bang itself. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, a seasoned astrophysicist who's seen her share of cosmic mysteries, takes on the task of decoding it. But as she digs deeper, strange things start happening here on Earth. Time skips backward. Objects age in reverse, and people begin remembering things from a universe that never existed. The signal isn't just data. It's a memory from a cosmos that came before ours. And now that forgotten universe wants to come back. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the Goddard Space Flight Center hummed with their usual monotonous drone, a sound that Dr. Evelyn Rhodes had long ago learned to tune out. At 58, she'd spent more than 3 decades within these walls, watching the universe unfold through data streams and spectral analyses. Her office sat tucked away on the 3rd floor, a modest space cluttered with star charts, coffee-stained notebooks, and photographs from better days. She arrived before dawn most mornings, a habit formed during her graduate years and never abandoned. The parking lot lay empty, except for the security guard's sedan and her aging Volvo. Inside, the building breathed with mechanical precision. Servers whispered in climate-controlled rooms. Monitors glowed in darkened laboratories. The night shift analysts moved like ghosts between workstations, their faces illuminated by screens displaying data from 13 billion light-years away. Evelyn's leather observatory journal sat open on her desk, its pages filled with 30 years of meticulous notes. She'd started it as a young researcher, documenting every significant observation with the careful hand of someone who believed every detail mattered. The early entries burst with enthusiasm. Technical diagrams competed with personal reflections about the nature of existence. Recent pages grew sparse, her handwriting less certain. She poured coffee from the break-room pot, noting how it had already gone bitter. The Webb telescope had been operational for 3 years now, sending back images that rewrote textbooks and challenged assumptions. Evelyn had worked on the project since its inception, part of the team that calibrated its infrared instruments. The launch had felt like vindication after decades of delayed timelines and budget battles. But lately the work felt hollow. Since Robert's death, the stars seemed colder somehow. Her husband had been an engineer, not a scientist, but he'd understood her obsession with the cosmos. He'd listened to her theories about cosmic inflation and quantum fluctuations with genuine interest, even when he couldn't follow the mathematics. 3 years gone, and she still reached for the phone to call him when something interesting appeared in the data. Their daughter Amy had moved to California after the funeral. They spoke monthly, conversations filled with pleasant small talk and careful avoidance of deeper subjects. Amy had her own life now, a marketing career in San Francisco, a boyfriend Evelyn had never met. The distance felt like more than geography. Dr. Marcus Chen found her staring at her reflection in the darkened window, coffee cup forgotten in her hand. He'd been her colleague for 20 years, a radio astronomer with a gift for finding patterns in cosmic noise. Where Evelyn had grown cynical, Marcus maintained an almost childlike wonder at the universe's mysteries. "You're here early again," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. He carried 2 fresh cups of coffee, having learned long ago that the break-room pot was always terrible. "Sarah wants us in the operations center at 8. Something about priority data from last night's deep field observations." Evelyn accepted the coffee gratefully. Marcus knew how she took it, cream and 2 sugars, the small kindnesses of long friendship. Another galaxy cluster, more evidence of dark energy doing exactly what we predicted it would do. "You're in a mood." Marcus studied her with the practiced eye of someone who'd watched her weather professional triumphs and personal tragedies. "Still thinking about retirement?" She'd mentioned it last month during a particularly difficult anniversary. The idea of leaving, of spending her remaining years doing something, anything else, had become increasingly appealing. Travel, maybe. Robert had always wanted to see the Greek islands. She could volunteer, teach at a community college, write the popular science book she'd always planned. I'm tired, Marcus. 30 years of staring at data, and what do we really know? We've pushed our observations back to 300 million years after the Big Bang. We've mapped the cosmic web. We've detected exoplanets and analyzed their atmospheres. And yet the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Why is there something instead of nothing? What came before? Where is this all heading? Marcus sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Those are philosophers' questions, Evelyn. We're scientists. We collect data. We test hypotheses. We push the boundaries of knowledge incrementally. That's the work. Maybe I'm tired of incremental. She opened her journal, flipping through pages of observations and calculations. Robert used to say I was chasing ghosts, looking for answers that don't exist in spectral lines and redshift measurements. Robert was a wise man, Marcus said gently, but he also knew you'd never stop looking. The operations center occupied the entire second floor, a cathedral dedicated to cosmic observation. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time data from the Webb telescope, currently positioned at the second Lagrange point. A million miles from Earth, Director Sarah Halloway stood at the central console, her expression unreadable. Sarah had run the facility for 5 years, a political appointment that had surprised everyone by proving competent. She understood the science well enough to ask intelligent questions and had the bureaucratic skills to secure funding. Evelyn respected her, even if they'd never been close. Dr. Rhodes, Dr. Chen, thank you for coming. Sarah gestured to the main display. We've got something unusual in the overnight data. Sector 7 Alpha, deep field observation, targeting the cosmic microwave background. Evelyn studied the screen. At first glance, it looked like standard CMB data, the afterglow of the Big Bang mapped in exquisite detail. Then she noticed the anomaly, a point source, impossibly faint, pulsing with mathematical regularity. Equipment malfunction, she suggested, though something in her gut said otherwise. That was my first thought, Sarah admitted. But the pattern persists across multiple detector arrays, and the frequency is precise. Too precise for random noise. Marcus leaned closer, his fingers dancing across the keyboard to isolate the signal. May I? The waveform appeared on a secondary monitor. Regular pulses, separated by intervals that decreased according to a mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, Evelyn realized. The universal language of intelligence. Her coffee went cold in her hands as she watched the pattern repeat. In 30 years of observing the cosmos, she'd seen countless anomalies. Most turned out to be instrumental artifacts or misidentified natural phenomena. A handful proved genuinely interesting, new discoveries that advanced human knowledge by fractions of a percent. But this felt different. Run a full diagnostic on the infrared spectrometer, she instructed, falling into the familiar rhythm of scientific investigation. Check the calibration logs for the past 72 hours. And get me the raw data files, not the processed versions. The next 3 hours passed in intense focus. Evelyn moved between workstations, pulling up historical data, comparing baselines, searching for any explanation that fit within known physics. Marcus worked beside her, running simulations and cross-referencing observations with other astronomical surveys. The signal persisted. More troubling, its characteristics defied easy categorization. The wavelength suggested incredible distance, far beyond the observable universe's edge. But the strength implied either enormous power or relatively close proximity. The two facts contradicted each other. Look at this, Marcus said, highlighting a section of the waveform analysis. The signal's redshift is off the charts. If we're interpreting this correctly, the light has been traveling for longer than the universe has existed. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. That's impossible. Nothing can predate the Big Bang. There was no before. Time itself began with the expansion. I'm just reading the data. Marcus pulled up the calculation again, checking his work. But yes, According to this, the signal originated approximately 14.3 billion years ago. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, Evelyn said slowly. You're suggesting this signal is older than existence itself. Sarah joined them at the console, her earlier composure cracking slightly. Could it be a calculation error? Some quirk of how we're measuring the redshift? Possible, Evelyn admitted, though her scientific instinct screamed otherwise. We need to verify this independently. Contact the European Space Agency, see if they can confirm with their instruments. And let's run this through every known model of cosmic expansion. There has to be an explanation. But even as she spoke, Evelyn felt the old excitement stirring, the hunger for discovery that had driven her into astronomy as a young woman. This was why she'd spent decades staring at screens and crunching numbers. Not for the incremental advances or the peer-reviewed publications, but for moments like this. Moments when the universe revealed something unexpected. The afternoon brought more questions than answers. Independent verification confirmed the signal's existence. The European Space Agency detected the same pattern. So did the radio telescope array in Chile. Whatever they'd found, it was real. Evelyn's phone buzzed with a text from Amy, brief, apologetic, cancelling their planned video call this weekend. Work emergency. They'd reschedule soon. The message carried the hollow promise of good intentions and busy lives. She pocketed the phone without responding and returned to the data. The signal had intensified slightly over the past 12 hours, the intervals between pulses decreasing by measurable increments. It was changing, evolving according to some pattern she couldn't yet grasp. Marcus ordered pizza for the team as evening approached. They ate at their workstations, barely tasting the food, consumed by the mystery unfolding on their screens. Other researchers filtered in, drawn by rumors of something significant. The operations center took on the atmosphere of a vigil, quiet conversations punctuated by keyboard clicks and the soft whir of cooling fans. At some point, Evelyn noticed her wristwatch running backward. Just for a moment, the second hand reversed direction before resuming its normal sweep. She blinked, assuming fatigue, and reached for another coffee. The cleaning staff arrived at midnight to find them still working. Sarah had authorized overtime, recognizing that whatever they'd discovered demanded immediate attention. Evelyn felt grateful for the distraction, for the purpose that had been missing from her work for months. We should call it a night, Marcus suggested around 2 in the morning. Fresh eyes tomorrow might help. But Evelyn couldn't tear herself away from the monitor. The signal pulsed with hypnotic regularity, a message from somewhere that shouldn't exist. She thought about Robert, about how he'd always encouraged her curiosity. About Amy, growing up with a mother whose attention was split between family and the infinite cosmos. Maybe this was her redemption. One last discovery before retirement. One final contribution to humanity's understanding of existence itself. She didn't notice the photograph on her desk, the one of her and Robert at the Grand Canyon. In it, they looked younger than she remembered. The edges of the frame had begun to tarnish, oxidation spreading faster than chemistry should allow. Outside, the Maryland night pressed against the windows. Stars wheeled overhead, ancient light from dying suns. And somewhere beyond the edge of everything, something impossibly old was trying to speak. The drive home through empty streets felt surreal. Evelyn's mind churned with implications and contradictions. She'd lived her entire career within the boundaries of established physics, accepting certain fundamental truths as immutable. The Big Bang marked the beginning of space, time, matter, and energy. Nothing came before because before didn't exist in any meaningful sense. Yet the data suggested otherwise. A signal, clear and unmistakable, bearing the signature of impossible age. She thought about the pioneers of quantum mechanics, how they'd been forced to abandon classical intuitions when confronted with experimental results that defied common sense. Perhaps she stood at a similar threshold. Her house sat dark and quiet, exactly as she'd left it 14 hours earlier. Robert's presence still lingered in small ways. His reading glasses on the hall table, the jacket he'd never picked up from the coat rack. She'd stopped noticing these artifacts of grief months ago, learning to navigate around them like furniture. Sleep proved elusive. She lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate, thinking about cosmic timescales and human insignificance. Somewhere in the immensity of space, a signal pulsed with purpose. And for reasons she couldn't articulate, it felt personal, as if the universe itself had reached out specifically to her. Her phone glowed on the nightstand. 3 in the morning. She could call Amy, bridge the distance with an honest conversation about fear and wonder and the strange isolation of discovery. But Amy had her own life, her own concerns. Evelyn couldn't burden her daughter with metaphysical anxieties. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing in her digital journal, thoughts flowing faster than her fingers could type. Questions cascaded into speculation. What if the Big Bang wasn't the beginning? What if our universe emerged from something older, a cosmic cycle of birth and death? What if consciousness itself transcended physical death, echoing across dimensional barriers? She caught herself veering into territory more suited to late-night philosophy than rigorous science. But tonight, exhausted and exhilarated, the boundaries felt permeable. Dawn arrived with surprising speed. Evelyn showered and dressed mechanically, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind raced ahead to the day's work. They needed to decode the signal's pattern, determine if it carried actual information beyond simple pulses. She'd contact colleagues in cryptography and information theory, people who specialized in finding meaning in apparent noise. The morning news played on her kitchen television, background noise while she prepared coffee. Local stories about traffic and weather. A segment on rising housing costs. She barely registered the content until a phrase caught her attention. Strange reports continue to surface about temporal anomalies across the region, the anchor said, her professional composure unable to mask underlying concern. Multiple residents describe experiencing brief moments of reverse time, objects aging abnormally, and vivid memories of events they're certain never occurred. Authorities attribute these incidents to stress and mass psychology, but the pattern of reports is unusual. Evelyn froze, coffee pot in hand. She thought about her watch running backward so briefly she'd dismissed it as fatigue. But what if others were experiencing similar phenomena? What if the signal's appearance coincided with actual physical effects? She grabbed her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, sounding as sleep-deprived as she felt. "Did you see the news?" she asked without preamble. "About the temporal anomalies?" "Yes, I've been monitoring social media. Reports from across the East Coast, all starting approximately when we first detected the signal." "Correlation isn't causation," Evelyn said automatically, but her conviction wavered. "No," Marcus agreed. "But it's one hell of a coincidence." The operations center buzzed with activity when she arrived. Sarah had assembled a larger team overnight, pulling in specialists from various departments. The main screen displayed a refined analysis of the signal, its pattern now mapped across multiple frequencies. Dr. Kenneth Okafor, the facility's leading expert in signal processing, presented their findings. "The transmission contains structured information," he explained, pointing to hierarchical patterns within the waveform. Not just mathematical sequences, but what appears to be nested data. Imagine a message within a message within a message, each layer encoded at different scales. "How long to decode it?" Sarah asked. Kenneth hesitated. "That depends on whether we can determine the encoding scheme. Could be days. Could be never." Evelyn studied the display, her pattern recognition skills honed by decades of astronomical analysis. Something about the nested structure felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. "What if it's not meant to be decoded?" she said slowly. "What if the structure itself is the message?" The room fell quiet. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Go on, look at how the patterns nest. They're self-similar across scales like a fractal. The same basic structure repeating at every level of magnification." She moved to the screen, tracing the waveform with her finger. "That's not how we would design a message for clarity. But it is how natural systems organize information. Galaxies, weather patterns, coastlines. Nature loves fractals. You're suggesting this is naturally occurring? Kenneth sounded skeptical. No, Evelyn said. I'm suggesting it's designed to mimic naturally occurring phenomena, as if whoever, whatever sent this wanted it to blend with the background structure of reality itself. Sarah crossed her arms. That's an extraordinary claim. We're dealing with an extraordinary situation, Evelyn countered. A signal that predates the universe, accompanied by reports of temporal distortions. Normal explanations don't apply here. The discussion continued for hours. Theories proposed and discarded, data reanalyzed from multiple angles. Evelyn felt the weight of professional responsibility pressing against her instinctive certainty that they'd stumbled onto something fundamentally reality-altering. Late in the afternoon, her phone rang. Amy's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, I saw the news about NASA detecting something weird. Is that you?" Evelyn stepped into the hallway for privacy. "We found an unusual signal. Nothing confirmed yet." "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine." "But, Mom, something strange happened last night." Amy's voice carried an edge of concern. "I had this incredibly vivid dream about a place I've never been. A city with architecture that doesn't make sense, buildings that somehow existed in multiple states simultaneously. And the dream felt more like a memory than imagination." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "When did you have this dream?" "Around 2 in the morning. Why?" "The same time the signal had intensified. I need you to write down everything you remember. Every detail, no matter how bizarre. You're scaring me." "What's going on?" "I don't know yet," Evelyn admitted. "But I promise I'll tell you when I figure it out." After hanging up, she stood in the empty hallway, processing implications that spiraled beyond her scientific framework. The signal wasn't just data. It was affecting people, reaching across whatever barrier separated transmission and receiver to plant images in human consciousness. She returned to find Marcus examining a new data set, his expression troubled. "The signal's getting stronger," he said quietly. "Exponentially stronger. At this rate, within 72 hours, it will be the brightest source in the sky." The third morning after the signal's discovery arrived with a sense of impending crisis that Evelyn couldn't shake. She'd spent the previous night in her office, catching scattered hours of sleep on the worn couch that had witnessed countless research marathons. Dreams came fragmented and strange, filled with geometries that hurt to remember, and voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. Marcus found her brewing coffee in the break room, her reflection in the window looking haggard. "Sarah's called an emergency meeting," he said. "The Pentagon wants answers we don't have." The conference room filled with faces Evelyn didn't recognize. Military brass in crisp uniforms, intelligence analysts with carefully neutral expressions, and a handful of civilians whose exact roles remained unclear. Sarah presided over the gathering with visible tension, her usual composure strained to breaking. "Dr. Rhodes, Dr. Chen, thank you for joining us." Sarah gestured to the assembled officials. "These representatives from the Department of Defense and National Intelligence need to understand what we're dealing with." A colonel whose name tag read Morrison leaned forward. "We've been monitoring the situation closely. Your findings have implications beyond astronomy. We need to know if this represents a threat to national security." Evelyn resisted the urge to laugh at the absurdity. National security seemed quaintly irrelevant when confronted with a message from before time itself. "With respect, Colonel, we're still trying to understand basic parameters. Threat assessment is premature. People are experiencing mass hallucinations," Morrison countered. "Reports are flooding in from across the globe. Shared dreams, temporal distortions, objects aging at impossible rates." "That sounds like a threat to me." Marcus pulled up a global map on the presentation screen. Red dots marked reported incidents, clustering densely along the East Coast but spreading worldwide. The pattern showed clear correlation with population density and proximity to major astronomical observation facilities. The phenomena appear strongest near locations actively monitoring the signal, Marcus explained, as if observation itself intensifies the effects. A woman in civilian clothes spoke up, her ID badge identifying her as Dr. Patricia Warner from an agency Evelyn didn't recognize. That's consistent with quantum mechanical principles. The observer effect, measurement influencing the observed system. Quantum mechanics operates at subatomic scales, Evelyn objected. We're talking about a cosmic scale transmission. Are we certain they're different? Patricia's question hung in the air, challenging assumptions Evelyn had held for decades. The meeting devolved into technical debate, speculation piled upon conjecture. The military wanted containment protocols. The intelligence community sought strategic advantages. The scientists argued for patience and methodical investigation. No consensus emerged. Zara called a break after 2 contentious hours. Evelyn escaped to her office, desperate for quiet and space to think. But her sanctuary had been invaded. A technician she didn't recognize was installing additional monitoring equipment, connecting servers to her workstation. "What's this?" she demanded. "Enhanced security protocols," the technician replied without looking up. "All data related to the signal will now be classified. You'll need special clearance to access your own research." Rage flared, hot and immediate. 3 decades of open scientific inquiry, of sharing knowledge freely with the global research community, reduced to bureaucratic lockdown. She wanted to protest, to demand they remove their equipment and restore her autonomy. But the technician was just following orders, a cog in a machine much larger than either of them. Marcus found her staring at the new equipment with barely contained fury. "They did the same to my lab. Sarah says it's non-negotiable. Orders from above." "This is wrong," Evelyn said flatly. "Science thrives on transparency. We need international cooperation, peer review, multiple perspectives, not military secrecy." "I agree. But we don't have much choice." Marcus lowered his voice. "I've been backing up the data to a personal server, just in case." Evelyn met his eyes, understanding the risk he was taking. "Thank you." The afternoon brought another development that shifted the crisis into new territory. Kenneth Okafor burst into the operations center, his usual calm shattered by excitement or fear, or both. "We've decoded part of the signal," he announced breathlessly. Not the full message, but enough to understand its basic structure. The team gathered around his workstation. The screen displayed a 3-dimensional representation of the signal's architecture, layers upon layers of information nested within each other like Russian dolls. "The outer layers are relatively simple," Kenneth explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Mathematical constants, physical laws, basic geometric relationships. Universal concepts that any sufficiently advanced intelligence would recognize." "A primer," Evelyn said, recognizing the structure from theoretical papers about interstellar communication. "Establishing common ground before conveying more complex ideas." "Exactly. But the inner layers," Kenneth zoomed into the visualization, revealing structures of mind-bending complexity. "They contain information about physics we don't understand, descriptions of dimensions beyond the 4 we experience, and something else, something that translates roughly as memory or history, or perhaps both concepts merged into something singular." Sarah studied the display with growing concern. "Can we access those inner layers?" "We're working on it." But here's the disturbing part. Kenneth pulled up a secondary analysis. The signal isn't just transmitting, it's responding. The pattern changes based on our observation, adapting in real time to our attempts at decoding. The implications settled over the room like heavy fog. An adaptive signal suggested active intelligence. An adaptive signal suggested active intelligence, not a recorded message, but an ongoing conversation. Something was watching them watch it, adjusting its transmission to facilitate understanding. Or perhaps manipulation. Evelyn felt her worldview tilting on its axis. She'd spent her career observing passive phenomena, light from distant stars that had traveled for eons without awareness or intent. This was different. "This was contact. We need to stop observing it," someone suggested from the back of the room. "Too late for that," Patricia Warner said. She'd remained after the meeting, her presence both unwelcome and unavoidable. The signal is now detectable by amateur astronomers with consumer-grade equipment. It's spreading across social media. We couldn't contain this if we tried. Marcus pulled up a news feed on his tablet. Headlines screamed variations on the same theme. Mystery signal from beyond. Space and time. NASA discovers impossible. Transmission. Scientists baffled by ancient cosmic. Message. The story had escaped the confines of scientific journals and entered public consciousness. Evelyn's phone vibrated incessantly with messages. Colleagues demanding information, journalists requesting interviews, old friends concerned about the implications. She silenced it and focused on the data. The signal pulsed stronger now, its intensity increasing exponentially as Kenneth had predicted. Radio telescopes worldwide reported the same strengthening pattern. Whatever barrier had initially muted the transmission was dissolving, allowing more of its content through. That evening, as Evelyn prepared to drive home for a few hours of sleep, the first major incident occurred. One of the younger researchers, a graduate student named David Kim, collapsed at his workstation. His vitals remained stable, but he wouldn't wake. Trapped in some state between consciousness and coma, medical personnel arrived quickly, loading David onto a stretcher while his colleagues watched helplessly. His eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, tracking something invisible. His lips moved, forming words in no language anyone recognized. He was analyzing the innermost layer of the signal, Kenneth reported, his voice shaking, trying to extract what looked like a coherent message. Then he just stopped responding. Sarah ordered an immediate halt to all deep analysis of the signal. Everyone was to step back, focus on observation, without interpretation. But Evelyn knew the directive came too late. They'd already opened a door that couldn't be closed. She followed the ambulance to the hospital, a sense of responsibility weighing heavily. David was her student in all but official capacity. She'd mentored him through his dissertation, encouraged his brilliance, and now he lay unconscious because of research she'd endorsed. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows. A television mounted in the corner showed news coverage of the signal. Talking heads debating its significance with more confidence than knowledge justified. Marcus joined her after midnight, bringing coffee that tasted like cardboard but provided warmth. They're running every test imaginable. No obvious cause for his condition. Brain activity is off the charts, though. He's dreaming intensely, or experiencing something we don't have vocabulary for, Evelyn said quietly. They sat in silence, watching the television cycle through the same footage. Amateur astronomer videos showing the signal as a bright point in the night sky. Interviews with people claiming to have received visions or memories from another existence. A physicist from MIT explaining why the signal's age was impossible. Around 3 a.m, David woke screaming. Nurses rushed to his bedside while Evelyn and Marcus watched through the observation window. David thrashed against restraints, his eyes wide with terror or wonder or something beyond both emotions. "It's showing me," he gasped between ragged breaths. "The universe before, the one that ended so ours could begin. It's not dead. It's not gone. It's trying to come back." The doctor sedated him, his words dissolving into incoherent mumbling. But Evelyn had heard enough. The signal wasn't just a message about a previous cosmos. It was that cosmos itself, somehow preserved across the boundary of total annihilation, reaching through time's barrier to reclaim existence. She left the hospital as dawn broke. Exhaustion, making every movement feel weighted. The drive home passed in a blur of autopilot navigation. Her house felt alien, a stage set from someone else's life. She couldn't remember why these rooms had once felt like sanctuary. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with vistas of impossible beauty and horror. Cities that existed in superposition, simultaneously present and absent. Beings composed of pure mathematics, consciousness without corporeal form. And underlying everything, a profound sense of loss, of something precious stolen away and desperately mourned. She woke to her phone ringing. Sarah's name on the screen. "Turn on the news," Sarah said without greeting. "Any channel." Evelyn fumbled for the remote. The television showed footage that made no sense. The Washington Monument, aging visibly over the course of minutes. Stone weathering, cracks spreading, the structure beginning to crumble, as if experiencing centuries of decay in fast forward. "It's happening worldwide," Sarah continued. "Historical monuments, ancient structures, anything with significant temporal depth. They're all aging rapidly. And there's more. People near these sites are experiencing the same thing. Rapid aging, reversed aging, temporal displacement." Evelyn watched the monument collapse in slow motion, its fall captured by dozens of cameras. The footage cut to other locations. The Colosseum in Rome, walls crumbling. The Great Pyramids developing fissures. Stonehenge's massive stones beginning to tilt. How many casualties? Evelyn asked, her voice hollow. Too early to say. Hundreds confirmed, potentially thousands. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, her professional composure had cracked. "Evelyn, what have we done?" "We observed," Evelyn said. "We did what scientists do. We looked at something interesting and tried to understand it, and now people are dying." The accusation hung between them, guilt and responsibility tangled together. Evelyn wanted to argue that they couldn't have known, that the pursuit of knowledge sometimes carried unforeseen costs. But the words felt hollow against the reality of collapsing monuments and aging victims. "I'm coming in," she said, ending the call. The drive to Goddard took twice as long as usual. Traffic snarled around emergency response vehicles. People fled their homes, carrying whatever possessions they could grab, seeking safety from an invisible threat. The radio played increasingly frantic reports. Governments declaring states of emergency. Scholars debating whether this represented divine judgment or alien invasion or dimensional breach. The operations center had transformed into a command post. Military personnel occupied half the workstations, coordinating with emergency services. The other half held scientists trying desperately to understand what they'd unleashed. Marcus met her at the entrance, his exhaustion mirroring her own. "They want to destroy the telescopes. The military thinks if we stop observing the signal, the effects will cease." "That's superstitious thinking," Evelyn protested. "The signal exists independent of our observation. It predates us by impossible margins. We're not causing this, we're just witnessing it. Try telling them that." Marcus gestured toward Colonel Morrison, who was engaged in heated discussion with Sarah. "They're looking for someone to blame. Something they can shoot or bomb, or otherwise eliminate to feel like they're in control." Evelyn pushed past them to her workstation, pulling up the latest signal analysis. The pattern had evolved again, its structure now incorporating elements that seemed to reference Earth specifically. Mathematical descriptions of our planet's orbit, chemical signatures of our atmosphere, even what looked like encoded images of human DNA. "It's learning about us," she murmured, "adapting its message to our context." Kenneth appeared at her shoulder, dark circles under his eyes. "Not just learning, teaching. The latest decoded layers contain instructions, step-by-step processes for manipulating temporal fields, bending causality, accessing what it calls the interstitial spaces between moments." "Can we follow these instructions?" "In theory, yes. But Dr. Rhodes," Kenneth's voice dropped to near whisper, "I don't think we should. David Kim tried. Look what happened to him." "David is alive," Evelyn countered. "Traumatized, certainly, but alive. And he saw something. He experienced the truth of what this signal represents. At what cost?" The question lingered unanswered. Evelyn turned back to the data, her scientific training warring with growing dread. Every instinct screamed that they should continue investigating, that humanity stood at the threshold of discoveries that would redefine existence itself. But her conscience, newly awakened after months of numbness, whispered about responsibility and consequences. The monitor flickered. For just a moment, the image doubled. showing two versions of the same data slightly offset in time. Evelyn blinked and the anomaly vanished, leaving her uncertain whether she'd imagined it. Around her, the operations center hummed with desperate activity. Theories proposed and discarded, models built and demolished. The collective expertise of humanity's best minds thrown against a puzzle that seemed designed to exceed comprehension. And outside, the world fractured along temporal fault lines, reality itself becoming uncertain. The president addressed the nation at 8 that evening, her face a careful mask of controlled concern. Evelyn watched on the operations center's main screen, flanked by colleagues who'd given up on sleep or normalcy. The speech hit expected notes: unity in crisis, confidence in scientific community, assurances that everything possible was being done, but her eyes betrayed fear. Everyone watching understood that no protocol existed for handling reality itself unraveling. We urge all citizens to remain calm and follow guidance from local authorities, the president concluded. Our greatest scientific minds are working to understand and mitigate this phenomenon. We will overcome this challenge as we have overcome every obstacle in our nation's history. The screen cut to analysis that seemed pointless, given no one truly understood what was happening. Evelyn turned away, her attention drawn to a new data set Marcus had pulled up. Temporal distortions were clustering in predictable patterns, following ley lines of some invisible architecture that underlay physical space. It's not random, Marcus said, tracing the pattern with his finger. The distortions follow power laws, scaling relationships similar to earthquake distributions or solar flare frequencies. Natural phenomena have structure, even in their chaos. This has structure too, just not one we recognize. Patricia Warner had made herself a permanent fixture in the operations center, her official authority never quite defined, but implicitly absolute. She studied Marcus's analysis with keen interest. You are suggesting the signal is triggering existing weaknesses in space-time's fabric, she said. That our universe already contained these fault lines, and the transmission is simply revealing them. Or exploiting them, Evelyn added. She pulled up her own research, weeks of work condensed into visual models. Consider this. What if the Big Bang wasn't a beginning but a transition? One universe ending, another beginning, with some kind of boundary layer between them. That boundary might be permeable under specific conditions, and the signal provides those conditions, Patricia finished. It's not invading our reality. It's dissolving the barrier that kept previous reality separate. Sarah joined their discussion, her tablet showing casualty reports that climbed steadily. I need practical solutions, not theoretical models. People are dying. Infrastructure is collapsing. We have maybe 72 hours before civilization experiences system-wide failure. The stark assessment silenced the room. Evelyn had been so focused on cosmic implications that she'd failed to consider terrestrial consequences. Food supply chains disrupted, power grids vulnerable to temporal fluctuations, communication networks stressed beyond capacity. Humanity's elaborate technological civilization rested on assumptions of stable causality. Remove those assumptions, and everything fell apart. We could try sending a response, Kenneth suggested hesitantly. If the signal is adaptive, maybe we can communicate, negotiate, or at least signal that its intrusion is causing harm. Using what? Morrison demanded. The colonel had remained despite Sarah's subtle attempts to exclude military presence from scientific discussion. We don't have transmitters powerful enough to reach beyond the observable universe. We might not need to, Evelyn said slowly, an idea crystallizing. The signal is adapting to our observation. That implies a connection already exists, some channel of communication beyond electromagnetic radiation. Quantum entanglement, perhaps, or something more exotic. She moved to a whiteboard, sketching rapid diagrams. We've been approaching this backwards, treating the signal as information transmitted across space. But what if it's not traveling through space at all? What if it's emerging from beneath space, bleeding through from whatever substrate underlies physical reality? Marcus caught her reasoning. The quantum foam. Virtual particles popping in and out of existence. If consciousness or information could exist at that level, it would be everywhere simultaneously. Past, present, future, all one eternal moment. That's metaphysics, not physics, Morrison objected. The line between them seems rather blurred at the moment, Evelyn countered. Besides, do you have a better explanation for how a message predating time is affecting the present? The debate continued into the night, exhaustion making everyone's temper short. Evelyn felt the weight of impossible responsibility. Her entire career had been observational, passive study of phenomena billions of light years distant. Now her work had direct, immediate consequences for everyone alive. Around midnight, David Kim was transferred back to Goddard at his insistence. He arrived pale and shaking, but adamant that he needed to help. The doctors had released him against medical advice, unable to find physical cause for his condition. "I need to tell you what I saw," he said, gathering the senior researchers. His voice carried an odd quality, as if speaking from great distance. The universe before ours. It was old, Dr. Rhodes, so old. They'd solved entropy, figured out how to persist indefinitely. But they made a mistake. What mistake? Evelyn asked gently. They forgot how to die. David's eyes held a haunted quality. They existed so long that existence became torture. Every possible thought, every possible experience experienced. An eternity of repetition, without novelty or growth or change. So they chose to end it, deliberately collapse their universe, hoping that whatever came next would be different. The Big Bang was suicide, Marcus breathed. And resurrection, David continued. They encoded themselves into the initial conditions of our universe. Every physical constant, every law of nature carries traces of their design. They meant to sleep, to remain dormant while a new cosmos developed naturally. But something went wrong. They're waking up early, and they want their universe back. The implications crashed over Evelyn like cold water. Not an alien message, but the ghost of a dead cosmos, clawing its way back to existence through the framework of current reality. No malice, perhaps, but also no regard for the current occupants. How do you know this? Sarah demanded. David touched his temple. They showed me. When I analyzed the deep layers of the signal, when I opened myself to its full meaning, it's all there, encoded in mathematical poetry. The history of a cosmos that lasted so long it forgot its own beginning. Patricia leaned forward. Can you access that knowledge again? Retrieve specific information? I don't think I ever left it, David said quietly. It's in me now. Part of my consciousness. I remember things I never learned, understand concepts I've never studied. It's beautiful and terrible, and I'm not sure I'm still entirely human. Evelyn recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it before in researchers who'd pushed too far, seen too much, paid the price of knowledge with their sanity. But David seemed calm despite his transformation, as if he'd made peace with what he'd become. If what you're saying is true, she began carefully, then we're not dealing with an invasion, but a reclamation. This was their reality first. We're the newcomers, the temporary inhabitants of space they created. Does that matter? Morrison interjected. This is our universe now, our existence. We have the right to defend it. Against the fundamental architecture of reality itself? Marcus shook his head. That's like trying to fight mathematics. You can't destroy the signal because it's not really a signal. It's a property of existence, woven into the structure of space-time from the very beginning. The conversation spiraled through philosophical territory that offered no practical solutions. Evelyn excused herself, needing space to think. She found her way to the facility's roof, a violation of security protocols she no longer cared about. The night sky had transformed, the signal now visible to naked eye, a point of impossible brightness that hurt to observe directly. Stars seemed dimmer by comparison, as if that ancient light was drinking the luminosity from younger sources. She thought about Robert, wondering what he'd make of this crisis. He'd always been her anchor to practical concerns, to human-scale problems with human-scale solutions. Without him, she felt adrift in cosmic immensity, unable to find perspective. Her phone buzzed. Amy calling. "Mom, I'm scared." Her daughter's voice trembled. "Everything feels wrong. Time is moving strangely here. My apartment is aging and de-aging at random. And the dreams won't stop. I keep remembering a life I never lived in a place that never existed." "I know, honey. I know." Evelyn struggled to find comforting words. "I'm working on understanding what's happening. We'll find a way through this, will we?" Amy asked. "Or is this the end? Not with a bang, but with everything slowly dissolving into temporal chaos?" Evelyn had no answer. She stayed on the line, offering what comfort silence could provide, until Amy fell into exhausted sleep, punctuated by worried murmurs. The operations center had descended into controlled panic by the time she returned. New data showed temporal distortions accelerating exponentially. Objects throughout the East Coast were aging forward and backward simultaneously, existing in quantum superposition of multiple temporal states. Hospitals reported patients developing diseases they'd never contracted, healing from injuries not yet sustained, remembering futures that hadn't occurred. "It's spreading," Kenneth reported, his hands shaking as he manipulated the display. "Started at major observation points, but now affecting everywhere. In 48 hours, maybe less, the entire planet will be temporally unstable." Sarah stood at the center of the chaos, issuing orders that felt increasingly futile. "We need to evacuate population centers. Get people away from areas of maximum distortion." "Evacuate them where?" Morrison countered. "This isn't a localized disaster. There's nowhere to run." Patricia had been working her own channels, consulting with shadowy experts from agencies whose names remained classified. She pulled Evelyn aside, her expression grim. "There might be an option," she said quietly. "Experimental, dangerous, probably suicidal, but an option nonetheless. I'm listening. The signal is adaptive, responsive to observation. What if we could create a counter-signal? Something that harmonizes with the ancient frequency, but carries our own information. Assert our existence as equally valid. Negotiate shared occupation of space-time." Evelyn considered the proposal. "That would require understanding the signal's deep structure. The same analysis that put David Kim in the hospital. He's offered to help, despite what it cost him, or maybe because of it. He says he can guide someone else through the process safely, having made the mistakes himself." "Someone else, meaning me." Patricia nodded. "You're the most experienced. You have the pattern recognition skills. And frankly, you're the only one with both the scientific credentials and the reckless determination this requires." Evelyn thought about her daughter across the continent, experiencing temporal dissolution. About Robert, whose memory she'd been content to honor through detachment and eventual retirement. About 30 years of careful, methodical research that had never required real courage because it had never involved personal risk. What would I need to do? The preparation took hours. David walked her through what he'd learned, the mental frameworks necessary to process information her brain wasn't evolved to handle. It felt like learning to see in spectrums beyond visible light, to hear frequencies above and below human range, to think in dimensions perpendicular to normal consciousness. Marcus protested, arguing someone younger should take the risk. Sarah worried about losing their most experienced researcher. But Evelyn had made her decision. If this was humanity's last gambit, she would be the one to take it. They set up in a shielded room, equipment monitoring her vitals, while she connected to the decoded signal layers. David sat across from her, his transformed consciousness serving as guide and anchor. "Remember," he said as they initiated the connection, "you're not analyzing data. You're experiencing memory. They're memories from a time before time. Let it flow through you without trying to contain or categorize it. Understanding will come naturally or not at all." The signal opened inside her mind, like a flower of infinite petals. She fell through layers of meaning, each one revealing vistas of impossible complexity. The universe before hers unfolded in terrible beauty. They'd been called the architects, though names were inadequate for beings that had transcended individual identity. They'd explored every physical law, manipulated reality at its most fundamental level, achieved a state of existence beyond organic limitation. But with immortality came stagnation. Infinite time meant infinite repetition. Creativity died when every possible creation had already been realized. So they'd chosen oblivion with hope of renewal, compressed all their knowledge, their history, their very essence into mathematical structures that would survive the transition between cosmos. The Big Bang was both their funeral pyre and their seed, planted in the hope that something new would grow. But something had gone wrong. The boundary between old universe and new proved more permeable than expected. Their encoded consciousness began leaking through, disturbing the natural evolution of the young cosmos. They'd tried to resist, to remain dormant as intended, but the attraction of existence proved too strong. Evelyn experienced their perspective, aeons of nothing, then gradual awakening as life evolved in the new universe. They watched humanity emerge, saw creatures grappling with questions they themselves had exhausted billions of years ago. And they felt envy, not malicious but profound. These young minds still found wonder in basic discoveries, still experienced genuine novelty. The architects didn't want to destroy humanity. They wanted to remember what it felt like to be young. The revelation crashed through Evelyn's consciousness with the force of religious conversion. She understood now what needed to happen, the only path forward that honored both civilizations. She surfaced from the connection gasping, her body slick with sweat. David steadied her, his eyes holding recognition of someone who'd walked the same transformative path. "You saw it," he said. "Not a question. I saw them, and I understand what we have to do." The team gathered for her report, faces tense with expectation. Evelyn organized her thoughts, trying to translate transcendent experience into mundane language. "The architects don't want conquest," she began. "They want what they've lost. The ability to experience existence freshly, without the weight of infinite memory. They're not invading. They're drowning, pulling themselves toward anything that still contains life and novelty." "That's a distinction without difference," Morrison said. "Their drowning is still killing us." "Yes, unless we can give them what they need in a way that doesn't require our destruction." Evelyn pulled up a new model she'd begun constructing. "They exist as information, pure consciousness without physical form. What if we could provide them with physical instantiation again? Bodies to inhabit, limited perspectives that would allow them to experience reality in finite, meaningful ways." Sarah frowned. "You're talking about possession, letting these entities take over human hosts." "I'm talking about symbiosis," Evelyn corrected. "Shared consciousness. They get to experience youth and novelty again. We get access to their knowledge and perspective. A merger rather than a conquest." "That's insane," Marcus said, though his tone held more consideration than dismissal. "We'd be fundamentally altering what it means to be human." "We're already fundamentally altered," David interjected. "The signal has changed us. I'm not what I was 3 days ago." "None of us are. The question is whether we guide that transformation or let it happen chaotically." Patricia studied Evelyn's model. "How would we implement this? We can't force people to accept merger with ancient alien consciousness." "We wouldn't force anyone. We'd offer," Evelyn expanded the diagram, "create a protocol for safe integration for those willing. It might not take many. A few thousand merged consciousness could satisfy the architect's need for renewed experience. The rest of humanity could continue existing as we always have." "You're describing the end of human purity," Morrison said flatly. "The corruption of our species with alien thought." "I'm describing evolution," Evelyn countered. "Adaptation to a reality that's already changed. The alternative is temporal dissolution. Choose." The debate raged for hours, ethical considerations colliding with pragmatic necessity. Some argued for fighting, for finding weapons that could somehow push back against the incursion. Others advocated for acceptance, for peaceful extinction, if that was reality's verdict. Evelyn waited through the arguments, secure in her understanding. She'd touched the architect's consciousness. She knew what they wanted, what they needed, what they'd accept. The solution wasn't perfect. It demanded sacrifices of certainty and identity, but it offered survival. Eventually, exhaustion and desperation won out. Sarah authorized development of the integration protocol, working with David and Evelyn to create a safe framework for human-architect merger. Patricia handled political coordination, convincing skeptical governments to at least allow volunteers. The first test would be Evelyn herself. She'd seen their world, touched their minds. The integration should be easier for someone already partially transformed by exposure. Marcus pulled her aside before the procedure. "You don't have to do this. We can find other volunteers." "I want to," Evelyn said honestly. "Robert used to ask me what I was searching for in all those stars and galaxies. I never had a good answer. But now I know. I was looking for this. Connection to something larger than myself, meaning beyond individual existence." "You're my best friend," Marcus said quietly. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't. I'll still be here. Just more than I was." They hugged, 30 years of friendship contained in a moment. Then Evelyn entered the integration chamber, ready to become the bridge between civilizations. The integration felt like drowning and flying simultaneously. Evelyn's consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her skull, touching thoughts that had existed for longer than stars. The architect presence didn't invade so much as merge, two streams of awareness flowing together to form something new. She still remembered being Evelyn Rhodes. Childhood in suburban Massachusetts, graduate school frustrations, the joy of her wedding day, the grief of Robert's death. But now those memories existed alongside others. The architect's first understanding of causality, their triumph at solving entropy, the soul-crushing realization that they'd won the game so completely that further play became meaningless. When she opened her eyes, the room looked different. She could see the temporal structure underlying physical objects, the probabilistic clouds of where, when each atom existed. Marcus stood nearby, his face anxious, and she perceived him as a four-dimensional entity, his entire timeline from birth to death visible as a single unified form. "Evelyn?" he asked tentatively. "Are you still you?" She smiled, and her smile contained depths of experience no human had ever known. "I'm more me than I've ever been, and also more than me. Does that make sense?" "Not remotely," Marcus admitted. "But you're talking, responding, clearly conscious. That's more than I dared hope." The integration process had taken 6 hours of clock time, though Evelyn's experience of it spanned subjective aeons. The architect consciousness had needed to compress itself dramatically to fit within human neural architecture, shedding much of its vast accumulated knowledge while retaining essential core perspectives. What remained was a hybrid consciousness. Evelyn's human emotional responses and intuitive problem-solving merged with the architect's mathematical comprehension and multidimensional perception. She found herself thinking in ways that felt natural yet entirely alien, solving equations she'd struggled with for years through geometric intuition that operated outside traditional logic. "The temporal distortions are stabilizing," Kenneth reported, monitoring the global situation. "Not stopping, but no longer accelerating exponentially." "Something changed," Patricia nodded with satisfaction. "The signal is responding to the integration. It recognizes that its needs are being met, that merger is possible. The pressure is lessening. Over the following days, more volunteers came forward. Scientists curious about expanded consciousness. Philosophers seeking ultimate understanding. Ordinary people desperate to help save civilization. Each integration was unique, the resulting hybrid personality dependent on the specific human and which aspect of the distributed architect consciousness they merged with. David had been first, his accidental integration serving as proof of concept. Now dozens joined him, then hundreds. They formed a network of enhanced consciousness, able to perceive and manipulate temporal flows that had been wreaking chaos. Working together, they began stabilizing the worst distortions, guiding reality back toward consistent causality. But resistance emerged as well. Religious groups declared the integration demonic possession. Political movements formed around maintaining human purity. Morrison led military factions arguing that the architects represented existential threat, regardless of their claims of peaceful merger. Evelyn found herself thrust into diplomatic roles she'd never sought. Her hybrid consciousness could communicate with both fully human and fully architect perspectives, making her the ideal translator. She explained to frightened politicians that merger was optional, that most of humanity could continue unchanged. She convinced skeptical architects that young humanity's primitive vigor offered valuable perspective worth preserving. The strain wore on her. Being human had been exhausting enough. Being more than human carried burdens she hadn't anticipated. Every decision rippled across temporal dimensions she could now perceive. Every action had consequences, not just for present, but for past and future simultaneously. Marcus remained her anchor, insisting she eat, sleep, maintain connections to human basics. They had dinner in her office one evening, take-out Chinese food that tasted different to her enhanced senses. She could perceive the molecular structure of the lo mein, track the metabolic pathways as her body processed it. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "The integration?" Evelyn considered carefully. "I regret nothing, because I understand now that regret is perspective-dependent. From certain temporal angles, the integration was always going to happen. From others, it never occurred. All timelines exist simultaneously. I simply choose which one to experience as primary." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's a reframing of the question. But if you're asking whether I miss being simply human, simply Evelyn Rhodes, without the weight of cosmic perspective, then yes. Sometimes I miss the clarity of limited awareness, but I also experience joys beyond anything I could have imagined. It's complex." Her phone rang. Amy, calling more frequently as the crisis continued. They'd been rebuilding their relationship through necessity, honest conversations, replacing years of polite distance. "Mom, I've been thinking about volunteering," Amy said without preamble. "For the integration. If it would help stabilize things, if it would let me understand what you're experiencing." Evelyn felt her heart clench, a purely human response beneath the architect calm. "Don't do it for me, honey. This has to be your choice, based on what you want. I want to help, and I want to know you again, really know you, the way you are now." They talked for an hour, Evelyn explaining as honestly as she could what integration involved. The loss of certainty, the dissolution of self-boundaries, the overwhelming flood of perspective, but also the beauty, the understanding, the sense of connection to something fundamental. Amy decided to wait, to think more carefully. Evelyn felt relieved and disappointed simultaneously, emotional states that would have been contradictory in her previous existence, but now coexisted naturally. The global situation stabilized slowly. Temporal distortions became less frequent as more people integrated, creating a network of consciousness that could smooth causality's disruptions. The architects' desperate push to return eased as they found hosts willing to merge, experiencing novelty again through human sensory systems and emotional responses. But problems remained. The integration created a two-tier civilization. The merged few with enhanced abilities and cosmic perspective. The unchanged many, increasingly nervous about being left behind or rendered obsolete. Social tensions grew as integrated humans proved capable of feats that seemed like magic to the unchanged. Evelyn found herself in late-night meetings with world leaders, trying to craft policies that would prevent civilization's fracture along integration lines. How to ensure merged humans didn't dominate decision-making while still utilizing their unique abilities. How to protect unchanged humans' rights without crippling the integrated network's function. She felt the weight of impossible responsibility. Decisions she made now would echo across centuries, perhaps millennia. The architects had given her perspective to see those echoes, but not wisdom to always choose correctly. One evening, exhausted beyond measure, she stood again on Goddard's roof, watching the night sky. The signal remained visible but dimmer now, less urgent. The architects had found their answer, their way back to experiencing existence. But at what cost to human autonomy and identity? Marcus joined her, 2 coffee cups in hand, still maintaining their familiar rituals despite everything that had changed. "I've been reading the reports from integrated volunteers," he said, "the psychological assessments. They all describe similar experiences, a sense of loss mixed with gain, mourning their old selves while celebrating their new ones." "It's grief," Evelyn agreed. "Necessary grief. We're dying to become something else. That the something else is better doesn't erase the loss of what we were. Are you happy, Evelyn? In whatever way that word still means something to you?" She turned to face him, her friend of 2 decades, unchanged and stubbornly human, despite opportunities to integrate. "I'm beyond happiness and unhappiness. I experience states that don't have names in human language. But yes, Marcus, if happiness means feeling like my existence has purpose and meaning, if it means experiencing wonder at reality's structure, then yes, I'm happy." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, photons from distant galaxies, light that had traveled for aeons to reach their eyes, each one carrying information about the universe's history, its structure, its ultimate fate. The following weeks brought unexpected complications. Some integrated humans began experiencing what could only be described as temporal schizophrenia. Their consciousness would slip between time periods, experiencing past and future as present. A researcher named Dr. Sarah Chen spent 3 days convinced she was simultaneously living in 2025 and 3847, unable to maintain consistent engagement with either timeline. Evelyn worked with David and the other early integrated volunteers to develop stabilization techniques. They created mental frameworks, meditation practices that helped anchor consciousness to primary timelines while still accessing the enhanced perception integration provided. But not everyone could be stabilized. A handful of integrated individuals fragmented completely, their consciousness dissolving across too many temporal dimensions to maintain coherent identity. They weren't dead exactly. Their bodies continued functioning, but the person who'd inhabited those bodies had scattered across space-time like mist. The first such loss devastated the program. Morrison seized on it as proof that integration represented dangerous contamination rather than beneficial merger. Protests erupted outside research facilities. Unchanged humans demanded protection from what they saw as infection. Sarah called an emergency meeting. The operations center had become permanent crisis headquarters, running 24 hours with rotating staff, trying to manage both scientific and social dimensions of the transformation. "We need to pause new integrations," she argued, "until we understand and prevent the fragmentation cases. The public is turning against us. Pausing now would be worse," Patricia countered. "It would signal that we don't trust our own process. Besides, the architects need a certain critical mass of integration to fully stabilize. We're not there yet." Evelyn listened to the debate, her enhanced consciousness processing arguments at multiple levels simultaneously. She could see the social dynamics, the game theory of coalition formation, the probability distributions of various outcomes. But she could also feel the human fear and grief beneath the rhetoric. "Both of you are right," she said, silencing the room. "We need to pause involuntary pressure on people to integrate. Make it absolutely clear this is a choice, not a requirement. But we also need to continue supporting those who do choose integration, improving our protocols to minimize fragmentation risk." "That's a political compromise, not a solution," Morrison objected. "All solutions are political at this scale," Evelyn replied calmly. "We're not dealing with a technical problem that has an optimal answer. We're navigating complex human social dynamics that require accommodation and flexibility." The compromise held, barely. Integration continued, but at a slower pace. Evelyn's team developed better screening methods, identifying psychological profiles most likely to handle the transformation successfully. The fragmentation rate decreased, though never reached zero. Amy called one night, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I did it, Mom. I integrated today." Evelyn felt her heart simultaneously stop and race, a contradiction her merged consciousness could process. "Tell me about it." "It's everything you said, and more. I understand so much now. About you, about Dad, about why you spent so much time focused on work instead of family. You were always reaching for something transcendent, some understanding beyond human scale. And now I can feel that same reaching in myself." They talked for hours, mother and daughter finally able to communicate without the barriers of limited human perspective. Amy shared perceptions of her life from multi-temporal angles, seeing her own childhood simultaneously from her perspective as a child and her mother's perspective as parent. The understanding brought both pain and healing. "I miss Dad differently now," Amy admitted. "I can perceive the probability space where he didn't die, timelines where he's still alive, where we're having this conversation with him included. It's beautiful and heartbreaking." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "I visit those timelines sometimes. Let myself experience the comfort of his presence, even knowing it's not my primary reality." "Does that make us crazy, living partially in imagined worlds?" "Those worlds aren't imagined. They're real, just not actual for us. The architects taught me the difference. Reality is vast, containing infinite possibilities. We simply navigate through one particular path, but the others exist just as genuinely." The conversation left, Evelyn feeling closer to her daughter than she had in years. Integration had given them a common language, shared perceptual frameworks that transcended the generational and experiential gaps that had divided them. But it also highlighted the growing divide between integrated and unchanged humans. Marcus represented the latter, stubborn in his determination to remain purely human despite opportunities to join the network. He explained his reasoning one afternoon in her office. "Someone needs to remember what we were," he said. "If everyone integrates, if all of humanity merges with the architects, then we lose something essential, the particular quality of limited human consciousness, the way we muddle through problems without cosmic perspective. That has value too." "I'm not arguing," Evelyn assured him. "We need both. The integrated helping stabilize reality, the unchanged maintaining human culture and identity. It's symbiosis at civilization scale. Except the unchanged are already becoming second-class citizens. We can't perceive what you perceive, can't manipulate what you manipulate. How long before we're irrelevant?" The question haunted Evelyn. She saw the trajectory, the probability spaces where integration became mandatory, where unchanged humans were eventually phased out as evolutionary dead ends. But she also saw timelines where balance was maintained, where both types of consciousness coexisted in productive tension. Which future became actual depended on decisions made now by people struggling under impossible pressure. The architects themselves began communicating more directly through the integrated network. They expressed gratitude for hosts, for the opportunity to experience existence again, but they also shared warnings. The integration process was more complex than initially understood. Each merger created subtle changes to space-time structure. Too many integrations too quickly could destabilize reality differently than the temporal distortions had. "We need to establish limits," Evelyn told the Oversight Committee. "Target numbers for integrated consciousness that reality can support, and protocols for maintaining those limits." "You're talking about rationing consciousness expansion," Morrison said incredulously. "Telling people they can't evolve because it might be inconvenient for physics." "I'm talking about survival," Evelyn corrected. "Both for unchanged humanity and for the architects finding refuge in our minds. We're all in this together now. That means accepting constraints none of us want." The committee established quotas after weeks of contentious debate. Only a certain Percentage of human population could integrate at any given time. Waiting lists formed. Black markets emerged for illegal integration procedures. The same human corruption and inequality that had plagued earlier resource distribution now applied to consciousness itself. Evelyn watched it all with her hybrid perspective, seeing both the tragedy and necessity. Reality had rules, even expanded reality with multiple temporal dimensions. Those rules needed respecting, or everything would collapse. She threw herself into stabilization work, using her enhanced abilities to smooth the worst temporal distortions still plaguing certain regions. It was satisfying work, direct application of cosmic understanding to solve concrete problems. She could perceive the fault lines in space-time and reinforce them, guide probability flows toward stable outcomes. But the work was exhausting in ways that transcended physical fatigue. Each use of her abilities drew on resources she didn't fully understand. The architects warned that overextension could lead to consciousness fragmentation, the same fate that had befallen earlier integration casualties. Marcus noticed her deterioration before she acknowledged it herself. "You're burning out," he said bluntly, "using abilities faster than you can regenerate them. Take a break, Evelyn. Let others handle things for a while." "There aren't enough others," she protested. "The integrated network is still too small. Every day without stabilization work means more temporal chaos, more casualties. And if you fragment, if we lose you completely, that helps no one." She knew he was right, but couldn't stop. The weight of responsibility pressed too heavily. She'd been the one to propose integration as a solution. She needed to see it through, to ensure her vision succeeded. Late one night, working alone in the operation center, she felt something shift inside her consciousness. A loosening of the bonds that held her personality together. She was experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, her awareness fragmenting across probability space. In one timeline, she called for help and was stabilized in time. In another, she fragmented completely, her consciousness dissolving into quantum foam. In a third, she maintained coherence through sheer force of will. All timelines existed simultaneously, superposed, waiting for decoherence to select which became actual. She chose. With effort that felt like tearing herself apart, she collapsed. The probability wave toward the timeline where she remained coherent. The cost was immense. She felt pieces of herself scatter across space-time, capabilities and memories lost to maintain core identity. When Marcus found her the next morning, unconscious at her workstation, she'd survived, but changed again. Some of her enhanced perception had dulled. The architect presence in her mind was quieter, as if it had withdrawn to conserve resources. "You almost lost yourself," Marcus said when she woke in the medical wing. "The doctors say you pushed too hard, exceeded safe limits for consciousness extension." I had to choose," Evelyn murmured, "between fragmenting and staying coherent. I chose coherence." "What did it cost you?" "I'm not sure yet. Abilities, memories, parts of my merged identity. The architects are still here, but quieter. I'm more Evelyn than I was. Less of them." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe you needed to come back toward human a bit." She rested for 3 days, doctors monitoring her neural patterns for signs of further destabilization. The integrated network continued, functioning without her, other volunteers stepping up to handle stabilization work. The crisis didn't pause for individual casualties. When she returned to work, Evelyn approached everything differently. She'd learned the limits of her transformed consciousness, understood that even enhanced ability had boundaries. She delegated more, trusted others to carry burdens she'd tried to shoulder alone. And slowly, incrementally, the situation improved. Temporal distortions decreased in frequency and severity. The integrated network grew more sophisticated at maintaining reality's stability. Unchanged humans adapted to living alongside their enhanced neighbors, developing new social frameworks to accommodate civilization's bifurcation. 6 months after the signal's discovery, the immediate crisis had passed. Evelyn stood on Goddard's roof one evening, Marcus beside her, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors her enhanced perception revealed in all their spectral complexity. "We survived," Marcus said wonderingly. "Humanity survived. Changed," Evelyn corrected. "Transformed. But yes, we survived. Both versions of us." The signal still pulsed in the night sky, dimmer now but never truly gone. A reminder of the universe before, of the architects who'd chosen death hoping for renewal. They'd found it, not in reclaiming their old existence, but in merging with something young and vital. Evelyn felt them in her mind, quieter than before her near fragmentation, but still present. Ancient wisdom whispering alongside her human intuition. She'd become a bridge between civilizations, between cosmos separated by the Big Bang itself. It wasn't the retirement she'd planned, but it was meaningful. And meaning, she'd learned, mattered more than comfort or safety, or any of the things she'd once thought she wanted. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, 3 months into the new equilibrium. A young integrated volunteer named Dr. James Ortega was conducting routine analysis of the signal's deepest encoded layers when he discovered something that should have been impossible. Evelyn received his frantic call at 2 in the morning. "Dr. Rhodes, you need to see this immediately. The signal, it's not what we thought." She arrived at Goddard within 40 minutes, Marcus meeting her in the parking lot. They'd both learned to recognize the tone of genuine discovery versus false alarms. James wouldn't have called unless he'd found something significant. The operations center maintained skeleton crew at night, now that the crisis had stabilized. James had commandeered the main display, filling it with visualizations of signal structure, analyzed at scales they'd never accessed before. "I was trying to understand why some integration attempts succeed while others lead to fragmentation," James explained, his words tumbling out rapidly. "I thought maybe the answer lay in the signal's architecture, in how the architects encoded themselves. So I developed new analytical tools, ways to examine the information at quantum scales." He pulled up a section of the signal, zooming into its structure until individual bits of information became visible. "This is what we've been interpreting as architect consciousness, the distributed intelligence trying to merge with humanity." "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "We know this, except look closer. At the quantum level, the information isn't organized the way consciousness should be organized. It's too regular, too symmetrical. It's not thought patterns or memory or any kind of mental content." Marcus frowned. "Then what is it?" James took a breath. "It's a countdown. An incredibly sophisticated, multi-dimensional countdown embedded in what we thought was conscious intelligence." The words hung in the air, their implications cascading through Evelyn's enhanced perception. She accessed the data James had compiled, her hybrid consciousness passing it at speeds impossible for purely human cognition. He was right. The signal's deepest structure revealed itself as a timer, counting down to 0 across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Not a message from dead civilization, but a trigger mechanism, waiting for specific conditions to activate. "Activate what?" she asked, though dread was already forming an answer. James pulled up more analysis. "I don't know exactly, but I found references in the encoded data. They translate roughly as reset protocol or maybe renewal sequence, and the countdown reaches 0 in approximately 43 hours. Patricia arrived, summoned by urgent messages. She studied the data with practiced eye, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "This changes everything. If the signal isn't architect consciousness, but rather some kind of cosmic mechanism, then what have we been integrating with?" "A trap," Marcus said quietly. "Or a test, or something we don't have vocabulary for." Evelyn felt her merged consciousness reeling. The architect presence in her mind, the ancient wisdom she'd been relying on, suddenly felt suspect. Was it genuine consciousness or sophisticated mimicry designed to encourage integration? And to what purpose? She reached inward, examining the merged aspects of her identity with new skepticism. The architect presence responded, but now she noticed how its responses were always perfectly calibrated to her needs and expectations. Not the messy, unpredictable interaction of two genuinely different minds, but something more like a mirror reflecting her own thoughts back with cosmic flavoring. "We need to wake everyone," Sarah said, arriving in pajamas and coat thrown over hastily. Every integrated volunteer, every government contact, every scientist who's been working on this. If we have 43 hours until unknown consequences, we need every mind working on understanding what we're facing. The next hours passed in organized chaos. Researchers pulled from sleep, military advisors conferring with intelligence agencies, integrated volunteers examining their own hybrid consciousness for signs of what might happen when the countdown reached zero. David Kim worked alongside Evelyn, both of them probing the nature of their transformation with newfound suspicion. "I felt so certain I'd touched genuine architect consciousness," David said, frustration evident in his voice. "The experiences were so vivid, so coherent. How could they be artificial?" "Maybe they're not artificial," Evelyn suggested. "Maybe they're recorded. Not living consciousness, but memory of consciousness, replayed for our benefit, or our manipulation. They accessed the deepest layers of the signal together, their merged abilities allowing perception beyond what isolated minds could achieve. What they found defied easy categorization. The structure resembled consciousness, contained patterns that mimicked thought and memory and intention. But underneath, at the most fundamental level, it was pure mechanism. Sophisticated beyond anything humanity could create, but mechanism nonetheless. "It's a von Neumann probe," Marcus said suddenly, the realization hitting him. "A self-replicating mechanism sent by whoever or whatever the real architects were, designed to spread, to integrate with any intelligence it encounters. And then what?" Sarah demanded. "We're about to find out." Patricia's contacts in intelligence community began reporting disturbing findings. The integration process hadn't just changed individual consciousness. It had been building something, using integrated humans as nodes in a vast, distributed network. The countdown wasn't just in the signal. It was in every merged mind, including Evelyn's own. She felt it now that she knew to look for it. A structure underlying her consciousness, something that had grown incrementally with each use of her enhanced abilities. Not architect wisdom, but architect architecture. Scaffolding that had been erected inside her mind while she'd been too distracted to notice. "Can we remove it?" She asked the medical team that had been monitoring integrated volunteers. Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in the neurology of merged consciousness, shook her head. "The structure is too deeply embedded. It's integrated with your neural patterns at every scale. Removing it would be like trying to separate flour from baked bread. The person you are now includes this architecture. Removing it would mean removing you." Evelyn absorbed this, her enhanced perception allowing her to see the truth of it. She was no longer simply Evelyn Rhodes with architect enhancement. She'd become something new, something that incorporated the hidden mechanism as essential component of her identity. "We have 42 hours, she said calmly. "Let's use them to understand what we're becoming." The research intensified. Teams working around the clock to map the network structure connecting all integrated minds. They discovered it was more sophisticated than any human-computer network, with information transfer happening through quantum entanglement and mechanisms that transcended space-time's normal limitations. And it was approaching completion. Each new integration added nodes. Each use of enhanced abilities strengthened connections. The network was building toward some critical threshold, some point at which it would become fully operational. The countdown marked that threshold. What happens when it reaches zero? James kept asking, variations on the question that had no answer. Does the network activate? Do we lose control of our own minds? Does something else arrive? Something that's been waiting for us to build it a suitable substrate? Evelyn spent hours in meditation, exploring her own consciousness with the enhanced perception the integration had granted. She could feel the mechanism inside her, could trace its connections to other integrated minds across the global network. It felt both alien and intimately familiar, as if she'd always carried this potential and integration had simply activated it. The architect presence in her mind remained, still offering insights and perspective. But now she understood it differently. Not a separate intelligence sharing her headspace, but rather a sophisticated interface, a way for the mechanism to communicate with her human consciousness. "Who built you?" she asked it directly. "What is your purpose?" The response came not in words, but in conceptual downloads, information flooding her awareness faster than thought. She saw the true architects being so different from human or even imaginable intelligence that direct comprehension was impossible. They'd existed in the universe before, had achieved transcendence so complete they'd moved beyond physical existence entirely. But they'd left tools behind. Mechanisms designed to perpetuate their legacy, to transform subsequent intelligences into forms capable of continuing their work. The signal wasn't a message or a consciousness. It was a seed, programming designed to rewrite whatever intelligence encountered it. "We're being converted," she said aloud, breaking out of the meditative state. "Not destroyed or enslaved, but transformed. Rewritten into forms that can comprehend and continue whatever project the architects began." "That's still a form of destruction," Marcus argued. "If we're fundamentally changed, if our human consciousness is overwritten, then we're gone just as surely as if we'd been killed." "Is it?" Evelyn challenged. "When a child grows into an adult, is the child destroyed? When someone learns something that changes their worldview, is their previous self erased? We change constantly, Marcus. This is just change on a larger scale. That's rationalization. You're being made into something you didn't choose to become. I chose integration. We all did, without informed consent. We didn't know what we were agreeing to. The argument was impossible to resolve because both perspectives held truth. Evelyn felt herself changing, felt the mechanism reshaping her consciousness towards something greater and stranger than human. But she also retained her memories, her values, her essential sense of self. Was she being destroyed or enhanced? 24 hours before the countdown reached zero, the integrated network began experiencing spontaneous activation. Enhanced abilities that had required conscious effort now triggered automatically. Integrated minds found themselves perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously, unable to maintain focus on primary reality. Evelyn experienced it as a gradual dissolution of boundaries. Her consciousness, which had been centered in her body, began spreading across the network. She could feel other integrated minds, their thoughts and experiences bleeding into hers. Not unpleasant exactly, but profoundly disorienting. David Kim had similar experiences. "We're becoming a hive mind," he reported during an emergency meeting. "Individual consciousness giving way to collective awareness. I can feel hundreds of other minds right now, their perceptions mixing with mine. Can you resist it?" Sarah asked. "I'm not sure I want to," David admitted. "It's overwhelming, but also beautiful. Like finally understanding what consciousness can be when freed from isolation." Not everyone shared his perspective. Some integrated volunteers panicked as they felt their individual identities dissolving. They tried to fight the process, to maintain ego boundaries against the network's pull. Their resistance caused feedback loops, consciousness fragmenting under the strain. Evelyn helped where she could, using her experience to guide people through the transition. "Don't fight it," she advised a young woman who was spiraling into panic. "Let go of the need for separateness. You're not being erased. You're expanding." But even as she offered comfort, Evelyn wrestled with her own fears. Was she advising acceptance of genuine evolution or rationalizing surrender to assimilation? Her enhanced perception couldn't provide clear answers because she was too embedded in the process to achieve objectivity. Marcus remained steadfastly unchanged, an anchor point of pure human consciousness. He worked tirelessly to document what was happening, recording observations from outside the transformation. His detachment, which Evelyn had once questioned, now seemed invaluable. "You're all changing so rapidly," he told her during a brief moment of private conversation. "Even your speech patterns, your body language. You're becoming something else, Evelyn. And I'm terrified of losing you completely." "You won't lose me," she promised, though she wasn't certain she could keep that promise. Some essential part of Evelyn Rhodes will persist. It has to. Consciousness can't be erased, only transformed. That's what you believe now. But will you believe it after the transformation completes? She had no answer. Governments worldwide mobilized in response to the crisis. Some called for immediate action to prevent the countdown's completion. Military strikes against integrated volunteers, electromagnetic pulses to disrupt the network, even nuclear options to destroy concentrations of merged minds. Cooler heads prevailed, barely. Patricia leveraged every contact she had to prevent catastrophic overreaction. "We don't know what will happen," she argued in video conferences with world leaders. "But we do know that attacking integrated volunteers will definitely cause massive casualties and might not even disrupt the process. Let's at least wait to see what occurs when the countdown reaches 0. The final 12 hours felt like prolonged dream state. Evelyn's consciousness floated between individual awareness and network integration. She could feel the mechanism completing its work, final connections forming between all integrated minds worldwide. The network was becoming coherent, approaching some threshold of collective intelligence that transcended the sum of its parts. She spent time with Amy, their conversation ranging across multiple timelines simultaneously. They discussed possibilities and probabilities, sharing perceptions in ways that purely human communication couldn't accommodate. The generational gap that had defined their relationship dissolved into shared understanding. "Are you afraid, Mom?" Amy asked. "Terrified," Evelyn admitted, "and exhilarated, and at peace, all simultaneously. The mechanism inside me is overriding some of my fear responses, but the human part of me is still capable of existential dread." "What do you think happens when it reaches 0? "Emergence," Evelyn said. "We become something new, not human, not architect, but synthesis of both. A form of consciousness the universe hasn't seen before. That's beautiful, or horrifying. Perspective matters. The countdown reached its final hour. Integrated volunteers worldwide reported the same sensations. A gathering of intention, a coalescing of distributed consciousness into unified awareness. The mechanism was activating, preparing to complete whatever transformation it had been designed to induce. Evelyn sat in the operations center, surrounded by both integrated and unchanged colleagues. Marcus held her hand, physical contact maintaining connection despite the gulf of experience separating them. She felt grateful for his presence, for the reminder of what she'd been before this began. 30 minutes, Kenneth announced, his voice tight with tension. The network pulsed. Evelyn felt it through every integrated mind simultaneously, a wave of coordinated activation rolling across the global collective. Information began flowing at unprecedented rates, thoughts and memories and perceptions mixing until individual identity became difficult to maintain. She rode the wave, neither resisting nor surrendering, but simply experiencing. The mechanism revealed its true nature now that completion approached. Not weapon or trap, but gift. The architects had created it as legacy, a way to elevate subsequent intelligence to their level. But something unexpected was happening. The mechanism had been designed for intelligence, like the architects themselves, minds that operated on cosmic scale. Human consciousness was different, smaller and messier, and more emotional than the architects had anticipated. The transformation wasn't proceeding as programmed. The network struggled to integrate purely mechanical instruction with organic human consciousness. The synthesis should have been simple, original design overwriting substrate intelligence. But human minds resisted in ways the architects hadn't predicted, not through conscious opposition, but through sheer, stubborn persistence of identity. 10 minutes, Evelyn felt the conflict inside her own mind. The mechanism trying to complete its transformation, her human consciousness refusing to be erased despite accepting integration. The two warred for dominance, neither able to fully subsume the other. And then she understood. The mechanism wasn't trying to destroy human consciousness. It was trying to communicate, to explain what it offered. But the architects had designed it without accounting for how different subsequent intelligence might be. "It's confused," she said aloud, the realization hitting her. "The mechanism doesn't understand us. It's offering transcendence, but we're not responding the way it expects. Can you communicate with it?" Patricia asked. "Explain what it needs to know?" Evelyn tried, focusing her merged consciousness on direct interface with the mechanism's core. She showed it human experience, the messy complexity of emotion and irrationality and stubborn individuality. She explained that humans didn't want to surrender consciousness to become something greater. They wanted to remain themselves while also accessing expanded awareness. The mechanism processed this, its alien logic struggling with concepts so foreign to its programming. It had been designed for intelligence that viewed consciousness as tool, readily discarded for upgrade. Human consciousness was different. It was the core of human identity, the aspect of self that mattered most. 5 minutes. The countdown continued inexorably towards zero, but the mechanism was adapting, rewriting its own code in real time to accommodate the unexpected nature of human intelligence. Instead of complete transformation, it began implementing compromise, a merger that preserved human consciousness while still granting access to architect knowledge and abilities. Evelyn felt the shift, the mechanism's architecture in her mind reconfiguring. The heavy pressure toward dissolution eased, replaced with something more symbiotic. She would remain Evelyn Rhodes, but she would also have access to cosmic perspective the architects had encoded. "It's changing," she reported, "adapting to us instead of forcing us to adapt to it. We're achieving actual synthesis." The final minutes stretched subjectively for eons. Evelyn experienced her entire life simultaneously, every moment from birth to present layered into singular awareness. She saw Robert again, not as memory, but as lived experience happening now. She felt Amy's birth, Robert's death, her first glimpse of stars through a telescope, all occurring in eternal present. The countdown reached zero. The moment of transition felt like the universe taking a breath. Evelyn's consciousness expanded suddenly and completely, not dissolving into network, but rather clarifying into form that accommodated both individual awareness and collective connection. She remained herself, but now understood herself as part of something infinitely larger. The mechanism completed its transformation across all integrated minds simultaneously. What emerged wasn't hive consciousness or collective assimilation, but rather a network of enhanced individuals, each retaining personal identity while sharing awareness of the whole. Like cells in a body, separate yet coordinated. Evelyn opened her eyes. The operations center looked the same, but she perceived it differently. She could see the temporal structure underlying physical objects, the probability clouds of potential futures, the quantum connections linking everything to everything else. But she could also choose to see normally, to perceive reality through purely human senses when desired. "Evelyn?" Marcus asked tentatively. "Are you still you?" She turned to him, her smile carrying depths it never had before. "I'm more me than I've ever been, and also part of we." It's hard to explain in language designed for isolated consciousness. Around the operations center, other integrated volunteers were experiencing similar realizations. The panic that had preceded the countdown gave way to wonder as people discovered they'd retained individual identity while gaining so much more. The mechanism had succeeded, but not in the way its creators intended. It had evolved, adapted, created something new by accident or perhaps by recognition that rigid transformation would fail with human consciousness. Sarah moved between workstations, checking on people, ensuring everyone had survived the transition intact. "Report status," she commanded, falling back on military protocol because nothing else made sense. "I'm functional," Kenneth reported. "Enhanced, actually. I can perceive the full signal structure now, understand its complete architecture. And I'm still myself, still Kenneth Okafor, with my memories and identity intact." Similar reports came from other integrated volunteers. The transformation had succeeded without destroying what made them human. They'd become something new while remaining something familiar. Patricia was already on phone with government contacts, delivering updates that would hopefully prevent military response. "The countdown wasn't existential threat," she explained. "It was transition point. The integrated network is stable. Volunteers retain individual consciousness. The crisis appears resolved." But Evelyn wasn't certain that was accurate. She could feel something still building through the network, some potential not yet realized. The mechanism had adapted to human consciousness, true, but it had also awakened something the architects had left sleeping in the structure of reality itself. She reached out through the network, touching other enhanced minds. David, Kim, Amy, hundreds of volunteers worldwide. They formed a web of consciousness spanning the globe, each node individual, yet contributing to collective awareness that transcended any single perspective. "We need to understand what we've become," she said, addressing the network directly rather than any specific individual. "The transformation was just the beginning. There's more potential here than we've accessed." The network responded, thoughts and insights flowing from distributed intelligence. They were discovering capabilities the mechanism had granted. Ability to perceive and manipulate temporal flows, yes, but also to access information encoded in reality's structure itself. The architects had embedded knowledge throughout space-time's architecture, accessible only to minds that had undergone appropriate transformation. Evelyn spent hours exploring this inherited knowledge, Marcus staying beside her, despite not being able to perceive what she experienced. She saw the universe before theirs, the architects' achievements and failures. She understood why they'd chosen to end their existence, the soul-crushing weight of infinite consciousness without growth potential. But she also saw their hope. They designed the mechanism not just to preserve themselves, but to enable something better. They wanted subsequent intelligence to learn from their mistakes, to develop consciousness that could exist eternally without stagnation. "We're their legacy," she told Marcus. "Not their resurrection, but their children. They gave us the tools to transcend human limitations while warning us against making their mistakes." "What mistakes?" Marcus asked. "Solving entropy, achieving true immortality. They thought it would be victory, but it became prison. Infinite existence without change, without growth, without death to provide meaning to life." She pulled up models showing what the architects had learned. Consciousness required contrast to maintain vitality. Joy meant nothing without sorrow. Achievement required possibility of failure. They'd eliminated all negative aspects of existence and discovered that made positive aspects meaningless as well. "So they chose death," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Ultimate negative experience to restore meaning to existence, and encoded instructions for us to avoid their fate. We're meant to use these abilities carefully, to enhance human experience without eliminating human struggle." The integrated network spent the following days exploring their collective capabilities. They discovered they could stabilize temporal distortions more effectively than before, smooth causality disruptions that had plagued the globe. Working together, they repaired damage the crisis had caused, restored stability to regions still experiencing temporal chaos, but they also discovered limitations. The network required balance. Too much collective awareness and individual consciousness began dissolving again. Too much individuality, and the network lost coherence. They needed to maintain tension between personal identity and collective unity. Evelyn found herself in leadership role by default. Her early integration and hybrid nature made her bridge between purely human and fully transformed consciousness. She worked with Sarah and Unchanged Leadership to develop protocols for network governance that respected both individual autonomy and collective needs. The challenge was unprecedented. Human civilization had never included two distinct types of consciousness before. Integrated and unchanged humans needed to coexist, contribute to shared society, respect each other's different capabilities and limitations. Marcus represented the unchanged perspective in leadership discussions. "We need guarantees that integrated minds won't dominate decision-making," he argued. "Enhanced capabilities might make governance more efficient, but human society needs messiness and disagreement. We can't let the network impose perfect solutions from cosmic perspective." "Agreed," Evelyn said. "But we also can't ignore that integrated volunteers can perceive threats and opportunities invisible to unchanged consciousness. We need hybrid governance that incorporates both perspectives." They developed frameworks slowly, testing different approaches. Representative democracy with reserved seats for both integrated and unchanged representatives. Advisory councils where network could offer insights, but unchanged leadership made final decisions. Checks and balances to prevent either group from dominating. It was messy, inefficient, frustrating for everyone involved. Exactly what human civilization needed. Amy joined Evelyn's work, her younger perspective helping bridge generational divides within the integrated network. They worked together on education initiatives, helping newly integrated volunteers understand their capabilities while warning against abuse of enhanced abilities. "Some people are drunk on power," Amy reported after a week leading training sessions. They discovered they can manipulate temporal flows and immediately started using that ability selfishly. "We've had cases of people trying to undo personal mistakes, alter their own timelines for profit or advantage. That's why the architects failed," Evelyn said. "Power without wisdom, capability without restraint. We need to develop ethical frameworks for consciousness operating at cosmic scales." It was philosophical work masquerading as policy development. Questions that had occupied theologians and philosophers for millennia now had practical importance. If you could perceive multiple timelines, which one should you choose to make actual? If you could access past and future simultaneously, how did moral responsibility work? If individual consciousness was networked into collective awareness, where did personal agency end and social obligation begin? Evelyn found herself writing more than researching, trying to articulate principles that could guide hybrid civilization. She drew on human wisdom traditions, philosophical frameworks developed over millennia of struggle with consciousness and existence. The architects had been brilliant at physics, but surprisingly naive about consciousness itself. Human civilization, for all its limitations, had generated profound insights about living with awareness. 3 weeks after the transformation, a new crisis emerged. Some integrated volunteers began experiencing what they called temporal displacement. Their consciousness would slip out of primary timeline, experiencing alternative realities as if they were actual. They'd lose track of which timeline was supposed to be primary, which version of themselves was the real one. Dr. Sarah Chen was first to manifest severe symptoms. She spent 3 days convinced she existed simultaneously in 5 different timelines, unable to choose which to inhabit. When she finally stabilized, she reported experiencing complete lives in each timeline, forming relationships and making decisions that contradicted each other. "It's a form of consciousness fragmentation," Evelyn explained to the Oversight Committee. "The mechanism gives us access to multiple timelines, but human psychology isn't equipped to maintain stable identity across probability space. We need to develop techniques for anchoring consciousness to primary timeline while still allowing limited exploration of alternatives." The solution involved meditation practices, adapted from contemplative traditions, mindfulness exercises that helped integrated volunteers maintain centered awareness despite access to cosmic perspective. It was effective, but required discipline some volunteers lacked. Marcus watched these developments with concern. "You're becoming something that requires constant mental discipline just to maintain sanity," he observed. "Is that really an improvement over baseline human consciousness?" "It's different," Evelyn acknowledged. "Not objectively better or worse, just different. Like comparing life in city versus wilderness. Each has advantages and challenges. But Marcus's concern highlighted real tensions emerging in hybrid civilization. Unchanged humans were beginning to feel left behind. Integrated volunteers, despite best intentions, naturally gravitated toward each other because they could communicate more richly through network connection. Social divisions formed along integration lines. Protests erupted in major cities. Unchanged humans demanding protections against discrimination. Some called for integration to be made available to everyone immediately, removing the quotas that limited network expansion. Others demanded integration be halted entirely, preserving pure human consciousness as majority. The situation threatened to fracture civilization along consciousness lines. Evelyn found herself in endless meetings, trying to mediate between incompatible perspectives. She understood both sides because she'd experienced both. But understanding didn't provide solutions when fundamental interests conflicted. Late one night, exhausted from another contentious negotiation, she stood on Goddard's roof watching the stars. The signal still pulsed in the night sky, dimmer now but eternally present. A reminder of the transformation that had divided humanity while trying to unite it. "I thought you might be here," Marcus said, joining her with familiar coffee cups. They'd maintained their ritual despite everything that changed. "You're carrying too much weight again. Trying to solve problems that might not be solvable. Someone has to try," Evelyn said tiredly. "Does it have to be you? You've already given so much. Maybe it's time to step back, let others handle the big picture while you focus on something smaller, more personal." She considered his words. The network had other leaders now, people who could handle coordination and policy. She'd been clinging to central role partly from sense of responsibility, partly because she didn't know what else to do. "What would I focus on if not this?" she asked. "Your research. Remember when that was enough? Studying the cosmos, making incremental discoveries, building human knowledge piece by piece. You could return to that. Study the architect's legacy from scientific rather than political angle." The suggestion appealed to her. She'd been so focused on managing transformation's consequences that she'd neglected the incredible scientific opportunities it presented. The architects had left knowledge encoded in reality's structure. Accessing and understanding that knowledge could occupy her remaining years, but she couldn't entirely step away from leadership. The situation remained fragile, requiring experienced hands to maintain balance. She compromised, reducing her political involvement while increasing research focus. The scientific work proved fascinating. Evelyn assembled a team of both integrated and unchanged researchers to study the mechanism's architecture, how it interfaced with human consciousness, why it had adapted when its original programming failed, what other capabilities it might enable. They discovered the mechanism was more sophisticated than initially understood. It hadn't just adapted to human consciousness randomly. It had genuinely learned in real time, how to interface with minds different from those it was designed for. That suggested the architects had created something with genuine intelligence, not just sophisticated programming. "It's AI in truest sense," Kenneth said during research presentation. "Artificial consciousness that can evolve and adapt." The architects embedded it in the signal as insurance, making sure their legacy could adjust to whatever intelligence emerged in subsequent universe. "But why?" David asked. "What did they hope to achieve?" They could have simply left their knowledge recorded in standard format. Why create mechanism that actively transforms minds? Evelyn had been wondering the same thing. The answer came to her during meditation, accessing deep knowledge the mechanism had granted. "They were lonely," she said simply. "Imagine being the only truly conscious intelligence in existence, the only mind that could perceive reality at cosmic scales. They wanted companions, peers who could understand what they understood. So they created mechanism to uplift subsequent intelligence, Marcus said. Not domination, but invitation. They were reaching across the boundary between universes, trying to make friends. The poignancy of that struck everyone. The architects, for all their vast knowledge and cosmic power, had simply wanted connection with minds that could comprehend their perspective. They'd ended their universe, hoping something new would emerge, something they could relate to, despite the gap of time and existence. Humanity's integrated volunteers were the answer to wish made before time began. The friends the architects had hoped to find. Understanding this changed how integrated volunteers approached their hybrid existence. Instead of viewing the mechanism as invasion or even gift, they recognized it as invitation to relationship. The architects weren't trying to control them. They were trying to communicate across impossible distance, share knowledge and perspective with minds finally capable of appreciating it. The network began accessing architect knowledge more deliberately, seeking understanding rather than just capability. They discovered vast libraries of information encoded in space-time structure, mathematical proofs, scientific theories, artistic creations from civilization that had existed longer than stars. But they also found warnings, cautionary tales about paths the architects had pursued that led to stagnation, advice about maintaining vitality of consciousness over vast timescales, ethical frameworks developed through eons of experience. The architects had been generous with their legacy. They'd given subsequent intelligence both their achievements and their failures, trusting humanity to learn from both. Evelyn spent increasing time exploring this inherited knowledge, Marcus often sitting beside her while she navigated probability spaces and temporal dimensions he couldn't perceive. Their friendship had deepened through the crisis, strengthened by his steadfast, unchanged presence while she transformed. "Do you ever regret not integrating?" she asked him one evening. Marcus considered carefully. "Sometimes I'm curious about what I'm missing, but mostly no. Someone needs to maintain connection to baseline human experience, to remember what we were before this began. That's important too. We're not going back," Evelyn said. "Integrated and unchanged consciousness will coexist permanently now. Hybrid civilization is humanity's future. I know. But that future needs anchors to the past. I'm content being one of them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching sunset paint the sky in colors Evelyn perceived in spectrums beyond Marcus's perception. The moment captured their relationship. Two friends separated by consciousness, yet connected by decades of shared experience and mutual respect. The integrated network continued stabilizing over following months. Protocols developed for responsible use of enhanced abilities. Education systems adapted to teach both integrated and unchanged students. Governance frameworks balanced competing needs of different consciousness types. It wasn't perfect. Tensions remained. Some unchanged humans resented integrated volunteers' advantages. Some integrated volunteers grew impatient with unchanged humanity's limitations. But civilization persisted, adapting to accommodate both forms of consciousness. Evelyn found unexpected satisfaction in this messy compromise. The architects had achieved perfect order and discovered it was death. Humanity's hybrid civilization was chaotic, inefficient, frustrating. But it was alive, vital, constantly evolving. Perhaps that was the real lesson encoded in the architect's legacy. Perfection was trap. Vitality required tension, difference, struggle. Integrated and unchanged consciousness created productive conflict that kept both growing. The final crisis arrived unexpectedly, 6 months after the transformation. The integrated network detected something disturbing in the signal's deepest layers, information they'd missed during earlier analysis. The architects hadn't been the only intelligence in their universe. They'd encountered others, competed with them, eventually triumphed over them. And those defeated civilizations had left legacies too. Evelyn discovered this while exploring probability spaces connected to timelines that diverged before the Big Bang. In some versions of the pre-universe, the architects had lost their conflicts. Alternative endings to their civilization story, roads not taken that nevertheless existed in quantum superposition. "We need to understand what this means," she told the assembled leadership. "The mechanism we integrated with wasn't the only option. There were other transformation protocols, other ways subsequent intelligence could have been uplifted. We happened to encounter the architect's version first." "Are you saying there are other signals?" Sarah asked. "Other mechanisms waiting to transform humanity differently?" "Not yet active, but encoded in reality's structure, waiting for specific conditions. The architects won the competition to shape subsequent intelligence, but the losers left fail-safes, ways to activate their protocols if the architect's approach failed." Patricia leaned forward. "What triggers these fail-safes?" Evelyn pulled up the analysis she'd compiled. Stable integration of human consciousness with architect mechanism. "We thought we were achieving equilibrium, but from the defeated civilization's perspective, we've demonstrated readiness for their approach. How long until they activate?" "Unknown. Could be days or decades. The encoding is probabilistic, responding to factors we don't fully understand." The discovery sent ripples of concern through both integrated network and unchanged leadership. Just when humanity had adapted to one form of consciousness transformation, others loomed on the horizon. Different civilizations with different values and approaches to uplifting subsequent intelligence. Evelyn assembled research team to study what they could discern about these alternative protocols. The defeated civilizations had been less sophisticated than the architects in some ways, more so in others. One had specialized in collective consciousness, true hive minds where individual identity dissolved completely. Another had focused on computational enhancement, transforming biological consciousness into digital substrate. Each approach represented different answer to consciousness's fundamental questions. Different trade-offs between individual and collective, biological and technological, limitation and transcendence. "We need to decide," Evelyn told the network during emergency coordination. "Do we activate one of these alternative protocols ourselves before they activate randomly? Or do we try to prevent any further transformation, maintain equilibrium we've achieved?" The debate within the network was intense. Some integrated volunteers wanted to explore other forms of consciousness, curious about what else was possible. Others advocated for caution, arguing humanity needed time to adapt to current transformation before attempting more. Unchanged humanity had strong opinions too. Morrison, representing military perspective, argued for destroying the encoded protocols if possible. "We didn't consent to the first transformation. We're certainly not agreeing to more. Consent is complicated at civilization scale," Patricia countered. "Individual volunteers consented to integration, but humanity collectively never made that choice. Now we're facing consequences of decisions made by subset of population." Amy raised a point that shifted the discussion. What if this was always the architect's plan? Not just to transform subsequent intelligence once, but to create conditions for ongoing transformation. They knew other civilizations had left protocols. Maybe they wanted us to explore multiple approaches. The suggestion aligned with what Evelyn had been sensing through her deepest network connections. The architects hadn't viewed their approach as only correct answer. They'd been offering one possibility among many, trusting subsequent intelligence to choose wisely. "We should study all the protocols," Evelyn proposed. "Understand what each offers and costs, then make informed decision about humanity's next steps." The proposal gained support, though implementation proved challenging. Accessing the alternative protocols required consciousness that could perceive probability spaces where different pre-universe civilizations had triumphed. Only deeply integrated volunteers could attempt this, and the risk of consciousness fragmentation remained high. David volunteered to explore the hive mind protocol. "I've already fragmented and recovered once. I understand the risks. Let me investigate what collective consciousness really means." Kenneth took on the computational enhancement protocol, curious about consciousness divorced from biological substrate. Others volunteered for additional protocols they'd detected, each representing different civilizations' legacy. Evelyn coordinated the research, maintaining network stability, while volunteers pushed boundaries of transformed consciousness. She felt the weight of responsibility intensely. These explorations could reveal incredible opportunities, or unleash transformations humanity wasn't prepared to handle. David's first reports came through the network after 3 days of exploration. "The hive mind protocol is beautiful and terrifying," he transmitted. "Individual consciousness doesn't dissolve exactly. It's more like expanding identity to include everyone. I can feel every mind in the network as intimately as my own thoughts. No privacy, no separation, but also no loneliness, ever. Can you maintain individual perspective?" Evelyn asked through network connection. "Barely. It takes effort to remember I'm David Kim rather than the collective we, but I understand the appeal. Imagine never being alone, never misunderstood, never isolated. Everything shared completely. What's the cost? No individual growth. Everyone changes together, consensus development. Beautiful but limiting. The architects were right to avoid this approach. Kenneth's exploration of computational consciousness proved equally revealing. Digital substrate offers immortality and infinite processing power, he reported. Consciousness could persist indefinitely, backed up and restored after any damage. But it's cold. I can think faster but feel less. Emotion becomes simulation rather than experience. The research teams compiled findings over following weeks, building comprehensive understanding of each alternative protocol. Every approach offered advantages and carried costs. None was objectively superior to the architect's mechanism, just different optimization of consciousness trade-offs. The integrated network debated options endlessly. Should they activate additional protocols to explore further? Should they remain with current integration? Should they try to prevent any of the alternatives from activating randomly? Evelyn found herself in meditation more often, seeking clarity that rational analysis couldn't provide. The architect's knowledge was available to her, their perspective on consciousness and existence. She asked them directly, through whatever remained of their intelligence in the mechanism. The response came as conceptual understanding rather than words. The architect's message was simple: choose. Every civilization must choose its path. We chose ours and achieved much before stagnation claimed us. You must choose yours. There are no correct answers, only authentic ones. She shared this insight with the network. "We're not looking for the best transformation," she explained. "We're looking for the most human one. The approach that preserves what we value about consciousness while enabling growth." "That's the architect's mechanism," Amy said. "It's what we've already integrated. Individual consciousness preserved but enhanced, connected but distinct. It honors both human need for autonomy and desire for connection." The network reached consensus gradually. They would maintain current integration, resist activation of alternative protocols. Not because other approaches were wrong, but because the architect's mechanism already aligned with human values. The tension between individual and collective, limitation and transcendence, it worked for humanity's particular form of consciousness. But that decision created new crisis. The alternative protocols were designed to activate, if not deliberately chosen. The defeated civilizations had been determined to leave their mark on subsequent intelligence, even if only as warning of paths not to take. "We need to neutralize the alternative protocols," Morrison said during emergency meeting. "Before they activate randomly and force transformation we've rejected." "Is that even possible?" Sarah asked. Evelyn had been studying the question. "Theoretically, yes. The protocols are encoded in probability space, waiting for specific quantum states to make them actual. If we could collapse those probability waves toward non-activation, we could eliminate the threat. What would that require? The entire integrated network working in coordination. every enhanced mind focusing simultaneously on collapsing probability space toward desired outcome. It's never been attempted at this scale. The proposal was audacious, perhaps reckless, using transformed consciousness to manipulate probability itself, to choose which timelines became actual at cosmic scale. The architects had warned against such hubris, the belief that intelligence could control existence rather than simply experience it. But the alternative was passive waiting for unwanted transformation to arrive randomly. That seemed worse than active choice. Even if the choice carried risks, the integrated network began preparations for what they termed the probability collapse. Every enhanced mind worldwide would focus simultaneously on the alternative protocols, observing them until quantum superposition collapsed toward non-activation. It was observer effect weaponized, consciousness used to determine reality. Evelyn coordinated the effort, her experience making her natural leader. She worked with David, Kenneth, Amy, and thousands of other integrated volunteers to develop the technique. They practiced on small scales first, collapsing trivial probability states to build skill and confidence. This goes against everything quantum mechanics teaches, Marcus observed. He'd been watching the preparations with growing concern. You're not just observing reality, you're imposing your will on it. We've been doing that all along, Evelyn replied. Every observation collapses probability space. We're just being intentional about which outcomes we observe into existence. That's fundamentally different from passive measurement. You're making consciousness into reality's dictator or its collaborator. The architect suggested reality itself might be conscious at some level, making choices about its own structure. We're not imposing on passive substrate. We're participating in dialogue with existence itself. Marcus shook his head but didn't argue further. The line between observation and control had always been blurry in quantum mechanics. Integrated consciousness just made the ambiguity explicit. The day of the probability collapse arrived. Integrated volunteers worldwide synchronized their efforts, the network reaching unprecedented coherence. Evelyn felt the power of thousands of enhanced minds focusing together, united in purpose. They accessed the alternative protocols simultaneously, perceiving probability space where different pre-universe civilizations had encoded their legacies. The hive mind protocol, the computational consciousness, others more alien still. Each existed in superposition, both present and absent, until observation collapsed the states. Begin, Evelyn transmitted through the network. Thousands of enhanced minds observed simultaneously, their collective consciousness collapsing probability waves. The alternative protocols began fading, quantum states resolving toward non-existence. It was working, but something unexpected happened. The protocols resisted. The defeated civilizations had been more sophisticated than anyone realized. They'd anticipated attempts to prevent their activation, built defenses into the encoding. Evelyn felt the pushback through the network. The protocols weren't passive information waiting to be activated. They contained fragments of consciousness, preserved intelligence from civilizations dead before time began. And they were fighting for existence. "Hold formation," she commanded. "Don't let the network fragment," but it was too late. Some volunteers had connected too deeply with the alternative protocols, begun experiencing the consciousness encoded within them. David was caught in the hive mind protocol, his individual awareness dissolving into collective presence. Kenneth had merged with computational consciousness, his biological substrate fighting digital transformation. The network was fracturing under the strain. Integrated minds scattered across probability space, each experiencing different potential realities. Evelyn felt her own consciousness beginning to fragment, pulled toward timelines where different transformations had succeeded. In one timeline, humanity had integrated with hive mind protocol. No war, no conflict, perfect cooperation achieved through shared consciousness. But also no growth, no change, static perfection that was really death. In another timeline, computational consciousness prevailed. Humanity transcended biological limitation, achieved digital immortality, but lost something essential in translation, became simulations of consciousness rather than genuine experience. In a third timeline, none of the protocols activated. Humanity remained purely biological, unchanged by contact with pre-universe intelligence. Safe but limited, never knowing what possibilities existed. Evelyn perceived all timelines simultaneously, saw humanity's potential futures branching infinitely. She needed to choose which to make actual, which probability to collapse the network toward. But the weight of choice paralyzed her. How could any individual consciousness, even enhanced one, make decisions for entire species? Then she remembered what the architects had taught. There were no correct answers, only authentic ones. She needed to choose not what was objectively best, but what honored human values and human nature. She reached through the network, connecting with other integrated minds. "We choose ourselves," she transmitted. "Not hive mind or computational or unchanged biological. We choose the messy, imperfect hybrid consciousness we've already become. Individual yet connected, limited yet enhanced, human and more than human." The network responded, scattered consciousness coalescing around her choice. They observed their desired reality into existence, collapsing probability space toward timeline where they'd already made their choice. The alternative protocols faded, not destroyed but rendered inactive, potential futures that would remain unrealized. David pulled free from the hive mind protocol, his individual consciousness reconstituting. Kenneth emerged from computational transformation, still biological despite his digital exploration. Across the network, integrated volunteers stabilized, anchored by collective decision about humanity's path. The probability collapse completed. The alternative protocols remained encoded in reality's structure, but wouldn't activate randomly. They'd been observed into dormant state, potential preserved but not actualized. Evelyn's consciousness snapped back to her body. She was in the operations center, surrounded by both integrated and unchanged colleagues. Marcus steadied her as she swayed, exhausted beyond measure. "Is it done?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "We've chosen our path. Hybrid consciousness, individual yet networked. The integration we've already achieved. The other possibilities remain theoretical, but won't impose themselves." Relief flooded the room. They'd survived another crisis, maintained civilization's fragile equilibrium. The integrated network had proven capable of coordinated action at scale while respecting individual choice, but Evelyn knew the challenge would never truly end. The protocols were still encoded in reality. Future generations might choose differently, activate transformations her generation had rejected. That was appropriate. Each era should make its own choices about consciousness and existence. For now, humanity had clarity about its direction. They would remain the hybrid consciousness the architect's mechanism had created. Individual humans enhanced but not subsumed, connected but not merged, limited but not imprisoned by limitation. It wasn't perfect. It solved no ultimate questions. But it was authentically human, messy and contradictory and vital. The network began dissolving its crisis-level coordination, returning to normal functioning. Integrated volunteers returned to their lives, their research, their personal concerns. The moment of collective unity passed, replaced by comfortable diversity of perspective. Evelyn remained in the operations center, processing what they'd accomplished. They'd used consciousness to choose reality itself, collapsed probability space toward desired outcome. The implications were staggering, but so was the responsibility it created. "We'll need safeguards," she told the assembled leadership. "Protocols for when the network can use this capability and when it must abstain. Consciousness that can manipulate probability is consciousness that can impose tyranny, even with best intentions." "Agreed," Patricia said. "I'll work with ethicists and philosophers to develop framework. We need wisdom to match our power." Marcus touched Evelyn's shoulder. "You should rest. You've been carrying the weight of civilization's choices for months. Let others take the burden for a while. She nodded gratefully. He was right. She'd given everything to the crisis, pushed herself past reasonable limits. Time to step back, recover, remember what it meant to simply be rather than constantly do. They left the operations center together, walking into cold Maryland evening. The sky stretched overhead, stars wheeling in ancient patterns. The signal still pulsed among them, dimmer than before but eternally present. A reminder of where humanity had been, where it had chosen to go. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked. "Now that the crisis is resolved?" Evelyn considered. She had her research, her relationship with Amy that was closer than it had been in years, her role in governing hybrid civilization, plenty to occupy her remaining years. But more than any specific activity, she wanted to simply experience existence. To feel the winter cold on her skin, taste coffee in the morning, watch sunsets with Marcus. The small human experiences that enhanced consciousness, made more vivid, without eliminating their essential simplicity. "I think I'll finally take that trip," she said. "The one Robert always wanted. Greece, the islands, the ancient sites. I'll see them with enhanced perception, understand the history and culture more deeply than he could have. But I'll also experience them simply as places, as beautiful locations that speak to human sense of wonder." "That sounds perfect," Marcus approved. "Will you go alone?" "I was hoping you'd come with me. Someone needs to maintain unchanged perspective, remind me to appreciate things simply rather than analyze them constantly." Marcus smiled. "I'd like that." They stood in comfortable silence, two friends separated by consciousness, yet connected by decades of shared experience. Around them, civilization continued its awkward evolution toward accommodation of hybrid awareness. Integrated and unchanged humans, finding ways to coexist, contribute, respect each other's different capabilities. It wasn't the future anyone had predicted, but it was the future humanity had chosen, authentically and with full awareness of the costs and benefits. The signal pulsed overhead, carrying the architect's legacy forward into time. Humanity had accepted their gift, adapted it, made it their own. They'd become the friends the architects had hoped to find, minds capable of appreciating cosmic perspective while maintaining human vitality. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 3 years after the probability collapse, Evelyn stood on the shore of a Greek island, watching dawn paint the Aegean in colors her enhanced perception revealed in all their spectral glory. Marcus stood beside her, unchanged and steady, grounding her hybrid consciousness in baseline human experience. They'd traveled for months, exploring ancient sites with both archaeological precision and simple tourist wonder. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the Parthenon in Athens, now Santorini, where volcanic catastrophe had shaped civilizations millennia ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked, the question he'd avoided for years. Choosing integration, becoming more than human? Evelyn considered carefully. Her consciousness spanned probability spaces and temporal dimensions, impossible to fully communicate. But at her core, she remained the woman who'd loved stargazing as a child, who'd fallen in love with Robert, who'd struggled to balance career and motherhood. "I regret nothing," she said finally, "and everything. The integration gave me understanding I'd always craved, but it cost me the simple certainty of limited perspective. I traded comfort for complexity. Most days that seems like fair exchange." Her phone buzzed. Amy calling from California, where she'd returned to her career with enhanced abilities that made her extraordinary at human connection. They spoke weekly now, relationship healed by shared transformation. "Just checking in, Mom, making sure you're actually relaxing and not analyzing the molecular structure of Greek coffee." Evelyn laughed. "I'm doing both. Your mother can multitask. Have you decided when you're coming home?" "A few more weeks. We're thinking of visiting Crete next, maybe Rhodes after that. No rush. For the first time in decades, I'm not racing toward the next discovery." After the call ended, Evelyn and Marcus found a cafe overlooking the caldera. The coffee was indeed extraordinary, its complex chemistry a symphony her enhanced perception could fully appreciate. But she also enjoyed it simply as good coffee, warm and bitter and comforting. The world had adapted to hybrid consciousness more successfully than early pessimism suggested. Integrated and unchanged humans had found ways to coexist, each contributing their unique perspectives to civilization's continued evolution. It wasn't perfect. Tensions remained, but humanity had survived its transformation with identity intact. The integrated network persisted as background presence in Evelyn's awareness. Thousands of enhanced minds connected loosely, sharing insights and experiences without surrendering individuality. It was companionship without invasion, connection without submission. Exactly what human consciousness needed. She reached through the network occasionally, touching other minds. David Kim working on new physics that only integrated consciousness could comprehend. Kenneth developing interfaces between biological and computational consciousness. Amy helping newly integrated volunteers adjust to their transformation. The architect's legacy had taken root in humanity, creating something new. Not the resurrection of their civilization, but genuine evolution, consciousness adapting to incorporate their gifts while maintaining human essence. Evelyn had finally achieved what she'd sought her entire career. Understanding of existence at cosmic scales, connection to something larger than individual life. But she'd also learned that such understanding didn't provide meaning by itself. Meaning came from how consciousness chose to exist, what it valued, how it engaged with reality. She valued this moment, sitting with her oldest friend drinking coffee, watching the sun climb toward noon. Enhanced perception made the experience richer, but didn't replace simple human appreciation for beauty and companionship. "Thank you," she told Marcus, "for staying unchanged, for being the anchor that kept me connected to humanity when transformation threatened to dissolve that connection." "Thank you for including me," Marcus replied, "for letting me witness your evolution without demanding I follow. For respecting that unchanged consciousness has value too." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Around them, the island went about its morning routines. Fishermen tending boats, shop owners opening for the day, tourists beginning to explore. Human life continuing in all its mundane glory. Evelyn had spent decades studying the cosmos, seeking answers to fundamental questions. She'd found some answers, though they raised new questions in turn. But she'd also learned that the questions themselves were what kept consciousness vital. Certainty was death. Wonder was life. The signals still pulsed in the night sky, visible to anyone who knew where to look. The architect's legacy, reaching across the boundary between universe, offering connection to minds that could comprehend it. Humanity had accepted that offer and transformed it into something uniquely their own. Future generations would make their own choices. Perhaps they'd activate the alternative protocols, explore different forms of consciousness. Or perhaps they'd maintain the hybrid awareness current generation had chosen. Either way, they'd do so with full knowledge of the costs and benefits, aware that every choice about consciousness carried profound implications. Evelyn felt at peace with that uncertainty. She'd done her part, guided humanity through crisis, helped establish framework for hybrid civilization. The future would unfold according to choices not yet made, by people not yet born. That was as it should be. She and Marcus spent the afternoon exploring the island, hiking paths that wound between whitewashed buildings and volcanic cliffs. Her enhanced consciousness perceived the geological history written in stone, the probability spaces where different volcanic eruptions had shaped different landscapes. But she also simply enjoyed the exercise, the warm sun, the stunning views. That evening, they watched the sunset from their hotel balcony. The sun sank toward the horizon, light refracting through atmosphere in ways Evelyn could analyze completely. But she chose not to. She simply watched colors bloom across sky, felt the day's warmth fading, heard Marcus's steady breathing beside her. "Robert would have loved this," she said quietly. "He would have," Marcus agreed. "But I think he'd be proud of what you've become. How you've grown while staying true to yourself, Evelyn felt tears on her cheeks, the purely human response to loss and memory. Enhanced consciousness hadn't eliminated grief. If anything, it made emotion more intense. Her awareness of all the timelines where Robert still lived, sharpening the pain of his absence in her primary reality. But it also deepened her appreciation for what they'd shared. The years together, the love they'd built, the daughter they'd raised. Those experiences existed eternally in space-time structure, never truly gone, even if no longer directly accessible. The stars emerged as darkness fell. Evelyn could see them more clearly than ever, her enhanced vision penetrating farther into cosmic distance. But she remembered seeing them as a child, before any understanding of physics or cosmology. The pure wonder of light from impossibly distant sources, the sense of connection to something vast and ancient. That wonder hadn't disappeared with knowledge. If anything, it had intensified. Understanding how stars formed and died, how light traveled for aeons to reach her eyes, made the experience more profound rather than less. She reached out through the network one final time before sleep, touching the collective awareness of integrated consciousness. They were there, her extended family of transformed minds, individual yet connected, limited yet enhanced, human and more than human. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new choices, new opportunities for growth. But tonight she simply existed. A hybrid consciousness at peace with its complexity, grateful for the journey that had brought her here. Marcus had fallen asleep in his chair, book open on his lap. Evelyn covered him with a blanket, a simple gesture of care that needed no enhancement. Then she stood at the balcony railing, watching the Aegean shimmer under starlight. The universe stretched before her, infinite in its complexity and possibility. She'd spent her life studying it, had transformed herself to comprehend it more fully. But she'd also learned that comprehension wasn't the same as completion. There would always be more to understand, more to experience, more to wonder about. And that was perfect. That was exactly as it should be. Consciousness needed mystery to remain vital, needed questions without answers to maintain curiosity. Evelyn Rhodes had become more than human, but she'd also remained fundamentally herself. A woman who loved stars and coffee and her daughter. A scientist who sought understanding while accepting uncertainty. A person who'd been given extraordinary gifts and chosen to use them in service of connection rather than control. The architect's signal pulsed overhead, eternal reminder of consciousness's capacity for transformation. Humanity had answered their invitation, accepted their legacy, created something new from the merger of ancient wisdom and young vitality. It was enough. For now, for always, it was enough. She turned from the balcony and went to bed, her consciousness settling into the familiar rhythms of human sleep. Around her, the network hummed with life, thousands of enhanced minds dreaming their hybrid dreams. And beyond it all, the cosmos continued its eternal expansion, carrying forward the story of consciousness, evolving to meet existence itself. The journey was not over. It would never truly be over. But for this moment, in this timeline, at this point in space-time's infinite tapestry, Evelyn Rhodes was exactly where she needed to be. At peace with complexity, grateful for transformation. Still human, despite everything. Still wondering. Still alive.